remind members about switching and also your tablet devices switch on to mute. Overview of today's business. Good morning, Alban. Briefing by Pat Ramsey, MLA, on the road traffic speed limits bill. Departmental briefing on the consultation on the Code of Conduct for local government. Apologies? None? Okay. I think Colin said he is going to leave early. That's okay. Chairperson, at page 5, members, there you have a letter from the North West taxi proprietors regarding taxi signs. They are asking the committee to urge the department to keep the current profile for taxi signs, as the group feels it would be an unfair cost to taxi drivers and companies to have to change signs. So, members, are you content if we send the letter to the department? Okay. And then also under this, item 2, under chairperson's business, you have a tabled paper there, the email from CNCC. It's in your table packed, page 2. I had a telephone conversation with Peter Archdale from CNCC. They are quite concerned about the slurry incident in Ballinderry. And although at the moment it looks like there's not going to be a lot of fish killed, but he's very concerned about slurry positions. And what he was saying was, generally speaking, planning permission is not required for slurry stores, as they are permitted development. But there are a number of questions that might be asked to the department. The first one is there any formal assessment made of the risks to the environment arising from the siting of slurry stores on hills or near waterways, such as the Ballinderry one? Is there any inspection regime that assess the material state of slurry stores, and if not, is there a case for introducing one? So apparently they last up to about 20 years. So once they're put there, is there kind of like an inspection on it? And the third one, if I can finish, as deal, you consider making environmental liability insurance mandatory for slurry stores?
I appreciate particularly from the planning permission side. Probably a bit like yourself. You may be a bit like me, but my knowledge of slurry stores is relatively limited, I have to say. But I'm just wondering, as regards some of those issues, is it worthwhile perhaps copying in that correspondence to the DARD committee? I'm just judging. I can understand an argument around planning permission, how close it is to the waterways side of things, and whether that's relevant. But it's not a bit of a grey area if you're talking about, for instance, inspections of those type of things, how much will fall within DOE and how much would be the DARD inspectors on that side of things. I'm just wondering, maybe it would be worthwhile forwarding that also to the DARD committee.
Yeah, we pass that to DOE and then DARD.
Which is the DARD committee. I think if there's any queries to be done, have to go through the committee rather than the department.
Okay.
Or at the department.
I was content with that. Yeah. Then next item, draft minutes at page 14. Members, are you content to agree the minutes?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Item number 4, matters arising at page 22. Members, there's a ministerial letter regarding appeals mechanism for local government bill. Minister previously advised us that he would bring forward an amendment to provide for a High Court appeal against a decision made by the Commissioner for Complaints. Following discussions with the Commissioner and having taken legal advice, he has now decided that judicial review will provide adequate mechanism to challenge a decision made by the Commissioner. The Minister does not now intend to proceed with the amendment for a High Court appeal. I think he sent all of us in individual letters to members.
Chair, in relation to that, I mean, I'm reasonably relaxed on the mechanism that we use. There was a drafted couple, I think it was possibly 2 amendments in relation to that, and one would be consequential in that regard. Now, whether it's the committee or whether certainly I would do it as an individual, I'd be still keen to press ahead of those. I think with the best will in the world, judicial review is not adequate in and of itself. I think it's all very well for the Commissioner Complaints to say that they regard it as adequate. It's not the Commissioner Complaints neck that's on the line. It is somebody somewhere in terms of a councillor of whatever party or independent who will receive a sanction, and presumably, even leaving aside the limitations of judicial review, by the time that they would get that, they could be disqualified from the council, their reputation could be ruined. And I think I have to say there's a normal process of natural justice that if there is going to be a sanction put against somebody, that there is some form of right of appeal. And I just don't regard. I think there is a high-hand attitude being taken by the Commissioner for Complaints. I think the Department clearly is willing to accept that, but I don't think we should be in. Chair, I would propose on the basis then that the 2 amendments that we'd previously drafted, which I think whenever we did the report, I think it had been indicated that we wouldn't move those on the ground that the Department was moving them. I think was the way it was put on it. Well, I would propose then, in the absence if we're not prepared to move them at this committee, then move them as committee amendments, because we would have put them as committee amendments had it not been for the fact that the Department said we will accept those as amendments. That's recorded in the minutes. Okay, so I propose that as a committee we move those amendments.
I would support that proposal. Obviously, when we talked about, I think Peter's outlined the case very well. So, we've had this debate. I'm contented.
Also,
hopefully we get support from the committee in relation.
Okay. Also, to let members know, there's a tabled paper, a letter from NEOGA, and they are, I think, quite concerned. They oppose the Minister's change of mind.
Chair, I just want to make the point that the general way in which the courts in these islands would deal with a decision by an ombudsman is by way of judicial review. It's not. There's no appeal mechanism.
No.
Now, that you may regard this as a unique situation apropos local government, but it does go against the traditional way in which these matters are met, and you're really moving away from the established legal position. And I just do not believe it to be appropriate in these circumstances. Now, I understand the strength of feeling around the committee and understand Mr Weir's point in relation to reputational issues and so forth. But I certainly wouldn't be supportive of this at this particular moment in time.
Chair,
I think Mr Frawley was quite emphatic about that.
He was. Yeah.
Chair, just on that, I suppose there's 2 points to make in connection. I appreciate what's being said. I suppose, first of all, this was an issue in terms of, with the exception of Mr Frawley, that we got a large number of representations from around a number of councils, representative bodies, saying that. I think where the distinction in this case is, if you're talking about essentially the appeal on an ombudsman's side of things, and it is, the vast bulk of ombudsman's decisions are largely directed against either a sort of a statutory body or a department, and in one sense, the DOE, in many ways, and it's right that you can't sort of have constant appeals against those. Yes. And I think the DOE should be broad enough to take that in the chin, that if for the sake of argument, it was appealed against the DOE or the housing executive or whatever, and there was a case of maladministration, that I think is fair enough, and I think they need to take that on the chin. This is a different situation because it is effectively a complaint against an individual and has a direct impact on an individual. And I suppose as well where we would differ a little bit from, potentially, unfortunately, from, might be wrong in this, but potentially where we could differ or it's a worse situation than, say, other jurisdictions, given probably the nature of Northern Ireland, the opportunity for somebody to be much more maliciously intended if they're making a complaint against an individual councillor. I think there's probably a stronger opportunity for that than it would be in, say, Wales, or, you know, maybe I'm painting things too sort of wrongly here in that regard on it, but I think there would be very major, and I think the distinction between the way an individual is treated and the way a corporate body or an institution is treated, I think, from that point of view. So I would urge us to press ahead with that as a route.
Yeah, I'm just concerned we may be setting precedent, and then they may just upset the whole system of judicial review or complaints commissioners working. The Minister says he's taken legal advice. I wonder if we could maybe ask a further question, what legal advice he has taken on
Sure, the only complication is, depending on timescale, and it depends, for instance, whether it goes through the executive today, provisionally, though it may or may not happen, the consideration stage of the local government bill is actually scheduled for the 18th.
Yeah.
And I think actually that would mean that if that is the case, then the closure in terms of, now that may or may not happen, because I think it's still to be looked at by the executive.
I think it's quite likely.
Well, if it's quite likely, I think that means that the closing time for amendments would be 9:30 next Thursday.
The Thursday before.
Yeah, which would mean this would be our last opportunity to have a view on this on it. So I appreciate in terms of the legal advice may say this is not necessary. I think there's an issue of natural justice here. And I think this is probably our last opportunity as a committee to give a particular view on this. So, as I said, I would propose that we put forward an amendment in the committee's name. Or I think, as I said, the wording in each case was actually already in our committee report, so it's just a question of the... Yeah. I think there's two amendments.
I think they were just recommendations, because the department had said they were going to draft the amendments.
I might be wrong. I thought... in terms of maybe my recollection is wrong, but I thought there was wording that was there. If there's not wording, then presumably we consult the Bill's office.
The department produced some wording from the Scottish example.
Yes,
they read it out at the meeting, and we sort of indicated that we would be happy with an amendment along those lines.
Yes,
but the wording of it wasn't exactly clarified. But I'd get in touch with the Bill office.
If we get it clarified of that nature, if there's whatever the technical, but I'm sure that's their expertise, and we're essentially giving them the guts for a week to do that.
I wouldn't be supportive of that amendment now.
Wouldn't you?
I would not be supportive of the committee amendment.
But presumably, chair, as committee chair, you would make that amendment outline as chair that you'd be proposing it.
Well, I mean, yes, I would say if it's a committee's view, I would say it's a committee's view, but we put it to a vote, we'll record it. Okay. So we're going to check the report on the wording of.
Well, I think in terms of the wording, it's probably the Bill's office or the people.
We'll check with Bill's office then.
But the amendment will go forward unless you vote on it now. Yeah. I mean, we would have to.
Chair, we don't really have time one way or the other. Okay. Now, it might be that it doesn't happen on the 18th, but I still think from that point of view, I think we should be pressing it.
Very likely. So, okay, if we put it to the vote, then members, that the committee is going to put forward an amendment in relation to the appeal mechanism. Sorry, Tom, I don't know whether you heard me. Originally, the department was to bring in an amendment.
That's right.
Appeal mechanism to go to the High Court. The Minister has considered it and had a meeting with Mr. Frawley and had sought legal advice. He's saying now he is not going to put forward an amendment for a different appeal mechanism. The appeal will have to be the judicial review route. Yep. So the committee had considered previously, we said we would support an amendment brought forward by the department. So in view of that, Peter is saying that as a committee we should put forward the amendment ourselves. So Auburn, you want to come back?
No, this is in principle. The amendment in principle is not correct, Chair. It's not we don't have a specific
Don't have any
wording.
wording.
No, we don't have the
And
word.
so we'll probably have to revisit this with this specific wording.
Chair, the problem is there isn't time to do that, but I think this would
Yes.
give authorisation to get an amendment drafted with the bills off.
Well, I have no objection to that, but I mean, I'm not supportive of the amendment per se, but if that's the way you want to do it, that sounds fine. Yeah.
Sorry, say, what do you
But
mean?
I the normal thing is an amendment is presented to a committee,
Yeah.
and the committee votes on the amendment. It's just now we're voting in principle that there should be an amendment of some sort coming forward, and that's a bit of an odd mechanism to use in committee. But I'm not making a big deal about it.
Okay.
Well, if we drafted a committee amendment, we would have to lay it next Thursday morning before, if the consideration stage goes ahead next week or the following week. We would have to lay it next Thursday morning before our committee meeting next Thursday morning.
Yes, might be difficult, but anyway.
Yeah. So, yes, we are voting for it in principle without seeing the amendment.
Well, in our committee report, we did agree that we wanted this in the report. That, it was because we thought the department was going to be bringing forward an amendment, and we agreed that we were content with that.
Chair, provided, the Bills Office will know from the technical point of view what wording is pretty much required in that regard. I would have thought, provided what they provide us with is in line with the previous position that we've taken on that in terms of how an appeal would operate. I would leave the exact wording to them. I wouldn't get too worried on the. I'm more than happy to trust their judgment on the issue.
Okay. Right, I feel that I was quite, I think, persuaded by Mr. Frawley. I have concerns about having a different appeal system. So, shall we put it to a vote?
Yep.
And I think can I abstain? Is it possible to abstain?
You could just go through both. Go through both. Do we want?
Or I just recall.
You don't have to vote.
Yeah, no, we don't have to
Not
vote.
there.
We just, I just declare that, I
Alvin, you wanna do
abstain
the
from
same?
that decision.
But I know I'm going to vote against. It's more convenient to vote against.
No problem. Okay.
Okay, then you wanted to put to a vote?
Put the question.
Well, just say that I dissented from.
Yeah, just, like Alvin just be saying if he's recorded as dissenting.
Yeah, that's fine. We have it finished. Yeah. Okay, members, we moved on then. Then, just members, that's Neilga's letter for you to note at page 27 in your pack, table to pack. So, next item, departmental letter regarding clause 10 of local government bill. That's at page 24, members. The committee had asked for additional clarification on whether positions of responsibility will be annual positions or positions for the full council term. The department has responded that Schedule 3 to the bill provides that the positions are to be held on an annual basis from one annual meeting of a council to the next. The guidance to be issued will provide additional clarity on this issue and will address the issue of appointments to external bodies where the term of office covers a longer period. So, members.
Chair, I'm happy to note that, and I think that's useful clarification. The only, I suppose, issue on it, I'm not asking the committee to do anything. I'm just indicating I'll probably bring a slight degree of amendment on this because I think it's the right approach that they're taking. It's the right approach in terms of the wording. The only concerns I would have would be twofold. I think that where you're talking about, I suppose for the record, where you're talking about if a council does go down the route of a cabinet-style position, then I think those should be talking about, those should be, for the duration of that particular council term. The other issue is, they talk about, if you like, drawing out in guidance where its appointments to external bodies would be for more than 1 year. The problem, I think, with that is you will then have in primary legislation it tied in as an annual pick within that. I think so. I'll be bringing amendments on both the cabinet style bit in terms of what defines as a term limit for that, but also then maybe separating out the external appointments, but to differentiate between those that are annual appointments and those that are for a 4-year period, because we'd all be aware there will be a number of external bodies that will seek a representative or a number of representatives for a 4-year or 2-year or 3-year period. And I think because the term within the legislation is defined as essentially a 1-year term, I'm not sure guidance in this case will be adequate to that, but I'm just, because I appreciate it wasn't an issue that we made any particular recommendation, so I'm not pushing any committee position in that regard, but I'm just notifying that. Probably I'm working with the Buildings Office to look at tweaking that. I don't think that should be really controversial, to be honest. That's it.
Okay. Any other comments, members? Yep. Okay, then we moved on. Next, then, at page 25, members, item 4.4, departmental reply regarding progress of marine plan. The committee had asked for an update on the progress of the marine plan following a stakeholder workshop in November. Last year, the department made several minor changes to the draft visions and objectives. The aim is to have a draft marine plan with the Minister by November this year, and following this to the Executive and the Secretary of State for approval prior to public consultation. So, members, and also remind everyone there's the workshop on the next item. Yep. So, So, I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Members, content to note? Yep. Then the next item, very conveniently, is to remind member about the invitation to the Marine Stakeholder event, and that's at page 40. That's the Marine Conservation Zone workshop. The department has invited the committee to attend a Marine Conservation Zone stakeholder workshop at the Lough Neagh Discovery Centre, Oxford Island, Craigavon, next Wednesday. It's an all-day event, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. There will be a number of presentations and breakout sessions throughout the day, which will cover the Marine Conservation Zone process in Northern Ireland, proposed areas of surge and connection with the wider UK network. Members, are you content to attend as a committee?
I'll not be here, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, I have to apologise. I have a full day of health events, so.
DFP that.
No, it's not. No, sorry, it's not next. No, not next Wednesday. No, Wednesday week. Oh, just okay. Wednesday week. Yes.
The same applies in terms of committee. Other committee.
So. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, we just don't know
Could be
whether
here, yeah, on the 19th.
it could be that there may be 2 days for the debate on the consideration stage of the local government bill. So it may run on from Tuesday to Wednesday. So we play it by ear, and as a principle, we would support it. If we can make it, I'd be very happy to attend. But, okay. And they also asked if I could make some opening remarks on the day. So, members, are you content if we attend that? I'll speak on behalf of the committee just to welcome the opportunities and, we'll work with them and that sort of thing.
That's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
Can we see a statement of the opening remarks before you?
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, members. Next item, 4.6, departmental reply regarding illegal dumping at Mowboy Road. That's at page 43. Members, the committee had asked for a timescale for the implementation of the recommendations from the Mayor's report on illegal dumping. The department states that the Minister expects to publish his response to the report by the end of March. Now, we did mention this actually at the meeting with the Minister, and Terry Ahern certainly set out verbally the time scale. We have a table paper on this, isn't it? Table paper. Have we got something then? No, we haven't. Okay. I think certainly he's saying that I think they have commissioned someone. Let me see. I have some notes here. The clean-up of the site has begun, he said, and experts have been engaged to determine the best option for dealing with waste. These experts will provide reports with their recommendations and projected costs, including whether the best course of action may be just to leave the illegal landfill in situ. Obviously, we will have to assess the long-term damage this may have. So I think they are looking into all that as well. And they said the long-term damage has still to be assessed, but early readings from the river have not shown any significant impact, although this will need to be continually assessed to determine the longer-term impact. They are saying, we asked about, polluters to, pay, and they said they will be pursuing in relation to the clean-up costs, which could be millions. So, yeah. So, members, any comments on this? And also there will be a debate on this as well, based on the Spotlight programme.
Yes.
Okay, members, then we moved on then. Content to note? Okay. Next item, item 5. Oh, sorry. This,
29.
Page 20. Sorry, members. 4.7. This table paper. Oh yes, that's about membership of committee at page 29 of your table pack. If I give member a bit of time to go over it, would that be okay? I find it pretty complicated. I'm sorry. I tried to get my head around the table and the numbers this morning. So if we have a couple of minutes to go over it, members, to let you have a read.
Table? Yeah, about 29 on.
Peter, greatest remainder method is proportional representation. Is that similar to that?
It's arguably similar. It's not. It's a form of proportional representation, but it's not. When people talk about PR, they generally speaking talk about single transferable vote.
Yeah.
Vote is greater remainder is a formula rather than people having a particular choice within that. But it's largely, I think, quotas greater remainder in the broadest level would be used across the committees for the committees in the Assembly. I think it's the formula that's used, or something similar in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. We have a chance, supposed to ask the officials later on when they come up to talk to us about code of conduct. I mean, from my first glance, it would seem that if it's grouped committees method, then it will help the independent and the smaller parties. Wouldn't it?
It can do. I think the issue actually is because of the way the courts sometimes go in situation. You can even sometimes get, because it falls to a relatively small remainder, you could actually get a large party that would actually lose out a little bit over a remainder bit if it was coming to a low element of remainder in that regard. I suppose just the general point is that if they're grouped together, it produces an overall fairer result across the board on it. I think the only problem, and I think it's something that should be thrown back to the department, and it has been mentioned to them, that may well mean that they have to do a reasonable, very quick level of quite a lengthy amendment to that at consideration stage. I think the one problem is that if it was also admitted that it could be, say, done at further consideration stage, but given the scale of the amendment, there's a concern that may not get accepted at further consideration stage because the amount of, the volume of the amendment, if you know what I mean. So I think that they need to move pretty quickly to put down a departmental amendment on that.
But is that not an amendment for Schedule 4 to say that it's just the start of the period that there will be allocation at the very beginning for the 4 years?
It's not a question that at the moment Schedule 4 essentially is drafted by way of a formula which would operate in each individual committee. Now you're talking about essentially it's the grouping of the committees rather than it's the grouping rather than the timescale as such. I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, that might only require maybe a relatively small amount of rewriting, but I think it might require a certain amount of rewriting to provide the formula which groups the committees together rather than the formula applying to an individual committee. So it would be a reasonable amount of change to Schedule 4, probably in terms of actual wording. I think it's felt to be quite technical in nature, and I think the feeling was certainly from, I think the attitude of I think whenever Eilish was mentioned as well, that the Bills Office point of view, their preference is actually that the department drafts an amendment on that, if it was going to go down the route of an amendment on it. But clearly I think there's a flaw in what's there at present, because at present the wording would lead to it simply being on each individual single committee rather than grouped, which will then create distortions.
Yeah, the smaller parties or the independent will never have a look in.
Well, they wouldn't have a look in. As I said, it can be according to, it may not necessarily be something which then produces something that's proportionate. Even for the bigger parties, you may get a situation in which, for the sake of argument, say you take on a council the two largest parties, and one on whatever way the formula would work out would say get a 4.2 and the other would get a 3.8 because the larger party has 2 or 3 seats more than the other. Well, you're actually then probably going to have identical representation on all committees for those parties, even though one's bigger than the other. So while it's maybe most acutely felt at the level of small parties or independents, it can actually have statistical quirks. Or, for example, if somebody, even a relatively smaller party, has a 0.6 or 0.7 on a quota graders remainder, they gain automatic representation onto every committee, and if it's disproportionate, you could get a smaller party actually getting a disproportionately high number depending on what way it falls as well. So there are various problems with a single application on that regard. I'm just looking in terms of some of the worked examples there.
But obviously individual councils can choose to do that. There's no stopping them from doing that, group or the committees together.
No, it would, because I think on the basis of what's there in Schedule 4, now maybe the department might have a different view on it, it talks about where a council appoints a committee. This is the formula to apply. So legally, I think, the way that is worded, you couldn't group them together. It legally, if that goes through as is, that formula would legally have to be applied. And presumably, if somebody wanted to kick up a fuss on that, they could take action to enforce that and say, well, actually, it actually quite suits our party to have 3 representatives on every committee, and your party to have none. If you apply the legislation correctly, that's what would happen. Even though it's, if there was an attempt to group, that actually grouping, I think, would actually be outside the law. So that's where I think it actually needs to change on the face of the primary legislation.
Yeah. Okay. But there's always further consideration stage. You would give them a bit more time.
Yeah, but sure, the only complication is depending upon the scale. I mean, first of all, I think if there's something can be drafted to change it, it's probably better that if it can be drafted in the next week. Yeah. And it strikes me that the vast resources of the department, if they put their heads together, should be in a position to do that.
Okay. But
I'm also saying that it may be, and it may or may not be, whenever it comes to the drafting, it may require a reasonably lengthy draft to change that in terms of the wording. Or it may not. It might be 2 or 3 lines. I don't know. But if it is a reasonably lengthy wording, the problem, I suppose, at further consideration stage is really meant to much more refine what's there. Yeah. So there may be an argument from the point of view of a bill's determination by the Speaker's office. They may or may not regard a large draft at further consideration stage and as being sort of adequate. The other complication is if they draft at this stage, put it in, and if there's any level of flaw, there's still then the opportunity for tweaking it for the consideration stage if there's been some mistake made. You're really putting all eggs in one basket and do it for the consideration stage, because if the draft make any level of mistake at all, then actually you're stuck with it and having to introduce new primary legislation to change that and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll ask them then.
Yeah.
We ask. Yes.
Do we want to go ahead and get an amendment drafted, or ask the department to draft the amendment now? Want to discuss it?
I think, Chair, to be honest, looking at it, it is fairly clear that the grouping of committees produces an overall more proportionate and fairer result than that. And I don't think anybody particularly could argue with that. I think we suppose maybe want to probe where they are in terms of that. But if they're not, we need to probably send them a fairly strong signal if we want to see a drafted change to accommodate that.
Okay. Yeah. And that would be under which one? Is a schedule?
Yeah, it appears to be Schedule 4. I think I talked about Schedule 5 earlier, but it appears to be Schedule 4.
Schedule 4. Yeah. Okay, members, then we move on. Quite a lot to cover today. Then next item, consultation on rights of bus and coach passengers at page 45, members. The consultation is on secondary legislation to give effect to EC regulation. These rules will set minimum requirements for the protection of bus and coach passengers and includes provisions on, among other things, non-discriminatory ticket prices and conditions, compensation and assistance in the event of accidents, cancellations or delays, and rights of disabled people and people with reduced mobility. Consultation began on the 21st of February for 4 weeks. Members, are you content to request a copy of the synopsis of responses?
Great.
Okay, next item 6 at page 49, synopsis of consultation responses on the draft UK-wide REACH Enforcement Amendment Regulations 2014. The main purpose of the draft amendment regulations is to allow DCM-based paint strippers to be used and traded subject to the controls for the safeguarding of human health. This was a UK-wide consultation, but there were no responses received from anyone in Northern Ireland. A large majority of those who did respond were in favour of the proposed derogation on the use of DCM in paint strippers in line with the draft REACH Amendment Regulations proposals. Members, are you content to note? I don't think it affects Northern Ireland very much. I don't think so. We don't have manufacturers or anybody using those chemicals.
Because I'm only asked the question. I mean, just because people didn't respond, it's not to say it may impact it.
It's come before us before. So we were told
I'm not arguing that point. I just wouldn't accept that, just because people didn't respond to the consultation, that it doesn't impact here. I mean, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay, next item is a briefing by Pat Ramsey, MLA, on the Road Traffic Speed Limits Bill. The bill seeks to reduce the number of accidents and fatalities on the roads by introducing a new lower speed limit in residential areas. Pat, you're very welcome.
Thanks
very much. And you've taken on the challenge then from your previous colleague. So please go ahead and present your briefing, and then take questions from members afterwards, please.
Okay, good morning. Thanks very much to the Chair and the committee staff for arranging this. It was the one previously, but I knew you were under pressure then. Clearly, I wish to thank the committee for the opportunity to brief the Environmental Committee on the legislative proposal to introduce a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on designated restricted areas. I have briefed the Committee for Regional Development a few weeks ago and received their constructive engagement in the progression of this bill. This presentation will supply the DOE Committee with an overview of the proposed bill in consultation with interest groups that has taken place and will continue to take place. The main objective, clearly, from my perspective, has always been to increase road safety, particularly for pedestrians and other road users. But as evidence from elsewhere suggests, a reduced speed limit also clearly benefits our health and our environment. As at present, there are some designated 20-mile-per-hour zones in this region, Northern Ireland. However, the introduction of legislation to be applied to appropriately designated streets would represent a positive step towards making our roads and streets a much safer place for everyone. It is envisaged the legislation would apply only to smaller residential streets and not major thoroughfares. Research from the Department of Transport has found that if a pedestrian hit, and this is very important, Chair, if a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle travelling at 20 miles per hour, there is about 2.5, 1 in 40 chance of being killed, or 97.5% chance of surviving, which compares with the very clear definitive research which states if you're hit by a car at 30 miles per hour, 20% there's 1 in 5 chance of losing your life or being killed, or 80% chance of survival. As a legislator, I believe we should be seeking to effect positive change in our society, and I believe that reducing the speed limits on some of our roads would ensure fewer accidents and fatalities on our streets, as well as a possibility of playing a part in contributing to public health well-being through encouraging more people to walk, cycle for short distances, and maybe taking everyday journeys as children could possibly do, and parents may have more confidence in enabling their children to go to school as well. Environmental issues, Chair, I'll go over some of those. The committee will be keenly aware of the importance of road safety and will recognise the need to make our roads a safer place for drivers and pedestrians alike. Under the stewardship of our own SDLP Minister, the Department has had road safety a main priority, and particularly this year, as we all know, the horrendous loss of life on the roads that we've had, certainly an increase, even all the advertising we do and public awareness campaigns. It is horrifying still, and horrifying for any family that has to face the trauma, distress and heartache of losing a loved one. I, like many people in Northern Ireland, note first hand the devastation that tragic actions cause to families. It is within our power as legislators to help put in place the appropriate legislation to help reduce the number of fatalities and injuries on our roads. Subsequent to my recent meeting with the DRD Committee, I have moved further to progress public engagement on the bill. I have written personally to each council in Northern Ireland to inform them of the private members' bill and clearly seek their views as local people on the ground councillors. I trust that this correspondence will lead to a more robust engagement that will ultimately enrich the bill and help and assist the bill going forward. Going through some of the information gathered from stakeholders to date, the consultation process conducted on the bill before the House received 41 responses. Of these 41 responses, almost they all agreed that there was a case for reform of the current speed limits, and this would lead ultimately to a reduction in accidents and fatalities on our roads. Many respondents believed that slower speed limits on some roads would increase the number of road users, such as cycling, pedestrians, thus suggesting potential benefits to public health. A majority of respondents stated they believe that the proposal should apply only to the classification of different roads. However, there appears to have been some confusion as to the classification of roads, which may have impacted on the result of some of the consultation responses that were received. However, this also highlights an issue in relation to defining where the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit would be appropriate, applicable, as had been anticipated prior to consultation. And this may have implications for the direction of the bill going forward. There has been some disagreement over how a 20-mile-per-hour might be implemented, with 45% stating that the increased signage would be the preferred means, while 35% disagreed with this approach. Many argued there is a need for a complete street approach, incorporating a package of measures to slow streets down, therefore considering a much more holistic approach. The key issues arising from the consultation approach are in relation to where the speed limit should be implemented and how it should be implemented. It was generally agreed that the proposed legislation would impact, no doubtly, positively on human rights and equality of opportunity. Some general comments that's important. There is clearly overwhelming support for the legislation. Need for a complete street approach incorporating package measures to slow traffic down. Public awareness, I think, is absolutely critical if there's any preference for or the possibility of introducing the bill. Blanket approach, perhaps not a most appropriate way of legislating. However, priority areas could be identified through councils, could be identified on a range of other areas. Big debate between 20 mph and speed limit may be appropriate to have zones as opposed to blanket legislating, as I previously had. Some confusion in relation to the roads. Rural roads, for example, would not be appropriate for this scheme. Clearly not appropriate. Although others would argue that 20 mph should be a starting point and that higher speed should be argued otherwise for. Support for public health and reduction in accidents and fatalities. Enforcement clearly as an issue may be problematic if the public campaign and cooperation with the statutory bodies and the police is not installed in the process from the commencement. Many strongly in favour of street design furniture to force reduction in speed, and one can imagine we have all been on the campaign trail where we're making representations in urban areas where people are seeking traffic calming measures. And unfortunately, it was highlighted at the presentation I made to the DRD committee. Unfortunately, and the facts of life are, it takes actions and unfortunately it may take a fatality before the road service may implement some road traffic calming measures in certain areas. And I don't think that's the right place we should be. In response to the well, a reduced speed limit as designated areas will result in a reduced number of accidents and fatalities. And I refer to those stakeholders such as Sustrans and Northern Ireland Greenways. In their communications on the issue, they have highlighted that a reduction in speed, as well as reducing the number of fatalities and injuries, would reduce the fear or perception of danger, which limits the independence of people with disabilities and older people. And it's clear, even over recent days, I have received a number of correspondence from older people who want to support the bill. We have an ageing population, and a larger ageing population, and certainly would give them greater confidence to walk around in their own areas casually. And it hits all the elements of the programme for government in terms of healthier living and encouraging people to participate in some form of leisure. People also raised the issue of good pavement design, stating that this empowers and gives confidence to pedestrians and cyclists alike, as well as reducing speed. All road users then see themselves as equals, and in the balance that engenders some mutual respect. Portsmouth, I'm going to give you an example, Chair. 20 mph speed limit was used as a study case for Sustrans, citing a reduction in traffic casualties by 22%. That's clear evidence that the committee may wish to pursue a wee bit further. In order to increase the number of cyclists and pedestrians, a goal cited by many government departments, and including our own programme for government, Department of Health, Social Service and Public Safety, we must make our roads a safer place. And certainly I think we're all keen that we would do that. I believe that this goal could be realised with the implementation of a 20 mph bill. As I've already stated, nearly 3/4 of all respondents to the consultation felt that reducing the speed limits on designated urban residential streets will increase the number of cyclists, pedestrians and other road users. Particularly, you can see it yourself in large urban areas and public housing areas. However, if we are to increase other road users, we must seriously look how we can then promote activities such as cycling. Access to bicycles is a major issue among stakeholders, clearly pointed out by a number of them. If we look at other parts of the UK for inspiration, we find that Bristol City, for example, has had great success in their scheme to roll out a 20 mph in every residential street that they have by 2015, following a most successful pilot scheme. The pilot scheme produced the following results: increasing the number of people walking within the 20 mile area, ranging from 10% to 36%. Increasing the number of people cycling within the 20 mph from 4% to 37%. Also, Bristol has shown the positive social impacts which can't be ruled, showing that residents on busy streets have less than 1/4 of the number of local friends compared to those living on streets with little traffic. A similar story in Hilden, Germany, where cycling journeys increased by 23% after introducing a town-wide 20-mile-per-hour limit. And again, it is a study case that the committee may wish to pursue as well. The organisation Break conducted a survey amongst commuters which revealed that many of them would be persuaded, if roads were safer, that they would increase by 30% the likelihood of them cycling if they felt to commute to that journey was less dangerous. 46% would be persuaded to make other journeys by bike given safer roads. Safer roads and routes to schools may also encourage parents to allow their children to walk, cycle to and from school. In terms of the road type for such a speed limit proposed by this bill, I believe firmly that it should apply to small residential roads, not thoroughfares and not main roads. This view is supported clearly, Chair, by the majority of stakeholders. Some 73% believe that speed limits should be applied to residential roads. There is a common trend that all roads and circumstances are considered when evaluating the speed limit, with a distance of 800 metres being seen as a maximum before people feel impatient and begin to drive erratically. Places, for example, that special consideration should be shown to are schools and school gates, residential roads, places where children are at play, unclassified roads and city centres. I'm nearly finished. Indeed, many of the cycling lobby groups believe that the proposed legislation would extend to B and C class roads, except where the speed limit is higher than 30 miles per hour. Promoting a behavioural change, and this is something I think we have to consider, promoting a behavioural change in regard to speeding habits is an important part of this proposed bill. We need to make our roads safer for all road users, and a driving culture has a major role to play in this. The majority of those consulted believe that reducing the speed limit on designated urban residential roads would bring consistency to road speeds and reduce the speed of our driving culture. Although many also feel that simply lowering the speed limit is not enough, and clearly I would accept that. It needs to be backed up with suitable levels of enforcement, education, awareness as well. The effective use of signage is another major issue. Sustrans suggests that a package of measures which also include stakeholder engagement, effective promotions, driver awareness campaigns, and clearly wouldn't succeed unless we had the involvement of PSNI, is clearly the best way to proceed. The Department of Transport signing the way made the creation of 20-mile limits both simpler and cheaper. Painting limits on the roads rather than cluttering the street with signs. Other ideas would include the need for education and promotion of a new 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. Raised tables and speed bumps, as I referred to earlier, when people think of calming measures, that's what they automatically think about. The idea that a street must feel it should be driven through more slowly. This can be achieved by redesigning areas, placing followers along a road, narrowing the road, painting speed limits onto the road. One study in New Zealand found empirical evidence that a road safety advertising campaign was effective in reducing the number of fatal crashes, and more importantly, it had an effect that was independent of the level of enforcement. Speed cameras clearly, and also police enforcement. Robust enforcement of 20 miles per hour will be a key to its success. The bill will propose the use of current mechanisms employed by the police when driving transgressions are committed, and the use of penalty points. This would ensure a uniformed approach and avail of a system currently in operation, and one that drivers recognise. The use of sliding scale of severity applying to offence was popular among stakeholders. The majority believe that the legislation is the best way to address this issue. However, many also agree that it shouldn't be teamed up with the initiatives, and I'll go over them again. Public campaign run in parallel with the legislation. Greater encouragement should be given to encourage people to go walking. Need to change the driving culture. Clearly, one point that will be of concern to all of us is the financial implications of the proposed bill. it is a serious question that needs to be addressed. This is always the case when public funds are used, and particularly how, due to the current financial climate we're presently in. And I'm finishing just with one example. The City of Portsmouth saw an entire cost of almost £600,000 to implement 20 miles per hour throughout the city. That's the entirety of the city. I believe that the social factors of such a piece of legislation outweigh the costs, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive briefing. Obviously, road safety must be at the forefront of legislatures and DOE working on improving road safety. But then, I understand the finding, the theory about the slower, the speed of the car, the less impact on the victim of any car accident. But I also understand, though, the majority of fatalities and serious injuries are really on our 60 mile per hour single carriage roads. So, your bill is not going to reduce impact like that, though.
Well, no, I would disagree, Chair. I think there's clear evidence, and I'm still compiling them, and there's some research presently being done on accidents across Northern Ireland in residential areas. But the clear evidence from other areas would clearly, definitively tell us that by introducing 20 miles per hour on small residential streets, and included that, it is important. You just can't include legislation without bringing forward awareness, bringing forward educational campaigns, ensuring that new drivers in particular going through their driving test are made aware of the fundamental changes. But it will be a cultural change. But Chair, I say, and make no mistake about it, it will significantly reduce. How many times have we sat or went to a family home where a child has been hit outside our own door? Those are residential areas. How many families have we visited where the parents are absolutely distraught? And only then, for example, and I made reference to it earlier on, that only when an incident like that happens do we find the road service, maybe as duty criteria, introducing traffic calming measures because a fatality occurred. So I don't think it is right. I don't think it's fair to say they only happen in 60 mile per hour zones. They happen quite often in residential areas.
I bring others in. I have a number of people who want to put questions to you. Cathal?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and I'll thank the member for his presentation. I think in principle, yes, I would agree in terms of the road safety element of it. Obviously, I know you left the cost element to the very last of the presentation because, it is an issue. I'm just trying to get an idea because, a lot of us as public representatives, be it as councillors or MLAs, certainly have dealt with this issue in terms of getting speed bumps or traffic calm measures right across the north and their own constituencies. I'm just wondering, see the way you said there about, you're talking about 20 mile per hour zone, you talked about signage. In terms of the package of measures, I take it speed bumps, narrowing of roads and signage and all of that will go into the package of measures. Is that what you're looking at, or is that?
Well, at this stage, Chair Cahill and myself, in our early years within Stormont, shared the role of Chair and Vice Chair on an all-party group on road safety. So I do appreciate Cahill has a strong interest in the road safety as well. I haven't defined yet exactly, whether there will be street furniture, whether there will be traffic calming measures. This is the point in coming to the committees as well, to try and get their support, to get some ideas and suggestions, and listen to them. It'd be pointless in me bringing forward legislation if I wasn't listening to members' comments. And the result of my engagement with the councils might identify priority areas where it could take place, and also my discussions with the department, particularly of region development, who have the overall responsibility for the roads. It might indicate a passage where I might have to change the course of it in terms of identifying priority areas where it be signage, whether it's road markings, whether it isn't necessary for the narrowing of roads as well. So we haven't exactly And I'm trying to get a consensus going forward on it as well.
No, and the question asked is, because we're trying to tease it out. See here, in part of the presentation you talk about streets and then you talk about roads. So if we take them on the streets in most of the urban settings, obviously, but then I know that there's a number of private residential areas that have requested measures.
Yes.
I mean, and I take it that they're including all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just public housing, but private housing. But I think in a way going forward, in terms of the private housing, you can maybe build something in the future that those developers have to take in place and something in place in the future. But I think that's the way around that element of it. But I'm just trying to get an idea. Obviously, cost is the major issue.
Well, yeah.
Teased out any of that. Given the fact that I would say there's a body of information and data right across the place that people would have requested certain measures down over the years in terms of. And I wonder, has any of that come up in any of your responses or anything?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of information that's come up, and the member is absolutely correct. This is not about public housing areas, it's about small residential streets. And on the whole, for example, in public housings, it's much easier to have traffic calming measures. And then
it's not easy.
Well, okay,
No.
I take your good grace on
Yes,
it.
because I know in South
Yeah.
Belfast, certainly certain streets, some residents would want street bumps. And I think you need to reach a certain threshold, asking local residents whether they would support it, unless they have a high majority of people agreeing to it. DRD would not put street bumps on streets.
Yeah. And it does. It's a long journey for many residents, and I know from my own constituency, the private residential areas are constantly campaigning and making representations because they're fearful of the safety of their children on the roads. But reflecting on the cause, and one would say, you know, we don't definitively know the cause. But in one regard, if we're going to save someone's life on the road, and the pain and the suffering and the trauma it's felt, I think it's a good investment. It's an investment to save. The clear evidence from around those areas that I referenced in Portsmouth and in Germany, where there's clear definitive evidence that as a result of that, they've made a reduction in road deaths, serious injuries and casualties on the road. And I think I accept the point on finance, and we are in difficult times now. But you talk to a family who's lost, and I'll share, you know, I come to this with a personal interest as well. I've lost a brother and his wife who were killed on the roads. So I come to it where we have seen the trauma and the heartache in the family, and what it has cost them in terms of mental health problems as well. So I see that in the cold light of day, and the difference it could make. If we could save one life by investing money, then it's a good investment.
And finally, Chair, I mean, obviously we've seen measures, it doesn't matter where you travel, some of the bigger cities, you see that they've narrowed the streets every 100 yards or every 50 yards, whatever. That's good. In terms of enforcement measures, I mean, what's the response in terms of that, obviously?
Well, the enforcement measures would be similar to what happens at the moment. The police are responsible for the enforcement on our roads of speed limits, and they're responsible for the 30-mile-per-hour limits on residential areas that I am referring to within this bill. The police certainly, and I'm meeting them again on this, and certainly I would hope to have the cooperation of the police going forward with this. There's certainly a level of resistance from the police that they mightn't have the manpower, but they're presently having to manage it and police it as it is. So I don't think it's a big undertaking. In other areas where this has happened, they have seen a huge difference.
That's all my questions.
People participating, cycling, walking as well. And so it's the social elements, the health issues, but it's also, I'm in this for one reason, Chair, and that one reason is road safety.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pat, for your presentation.
Okay.
Very interesting. I've heard the statistic before, and they are really hard-hitting. You know, the 1 in 40 chance of being killed at 20, and 1 in 5 at 30 miles per hour. When you try to do 30 miles per hour, it's actually very difficult. You know, you find yourself really concentrating on, you're looking to see what speed you're doing. Think, really, I'm actually doing that speed. But I think because in our vehicles today, it doesn't feel the speed that we're actually doing, so it is difficult. And I also think it's very difficult to keep even just to keep, not even to go above the speed limit, to keep the speed limits because of harassment from other drivers. I find it's actually very intimidating on the roads. You know, when you're doing the speed limit, if you're doing 70 in the motorway, you're sure to have somebody up your backside harassing you because you're not breaking the speed limit. So I think it's really, really important. I think the bill's a good idea, but I think it's really, really important that the most important part of it is that promoting behavioural change in all aspects and on all our roads, and just encouraging people to slow down. If everybody slowed down, actually it would all feel the same, and it doesn't make that much difference to your time by dropping your speed a little and having a bit of common courtesy for other road users. Very much like the idea of what happened in Bristol with the pilot scheme, which obviously resulted in usage by pedestrians and cyclists, because we all know through our schools and stuff, we're continually encouraging the kids, you know, to walk to school and to use other methods of transport rather than clog up the roads with all our cars, especially for short distances. But we do live in an age where we tend not to let our kids out to play. We keep them, you know, safe in the house. Whereas, you know, when I was growing up, you came back in when you were hungry or dark. It's a much different world now, and I think...
But you'd been put up a chimney at that stage.
Oh, indeed. I think it would be nice for the public at large to feel actually that it's a safer place to go out, and even the social aspect, even getting out for walks, because there's lots of roads, and there's times when you're driving on the road and you see pedestrians or cyclists and you think, oh, I wouldn't be walking this road, you know, I wouldn't be cycling this road, it's just too dangerous, no matter how well lit up you are in your bicycle or whatever, or walker. So I think it's a very good idea, the bill, and I personally would be supportive of it. As regards to enforcement, I would have to agree with you. I think, you know, enforcement should be there no matter what the speed limit is. So I don't think it's, to me, it's more about the public information campaign and, you know, educating the public and how they should be using the roads. I think that's a greater issue. I think I probably actually, I don't really so much have a question as those comments, really, Pat, because I'm generally supportive of the bill. I'd like to see more on it, and I would encourage you with the bill.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly have to say to you, I'm very encouraged, Pam, by your own comments. You know, certainly from a Muller's perspective as well, you're certainly voicing it, but clearly there is issues in our communities with road ragers as well, and they have to be. It doesn't matter for police to enforce, but it is a case that will require fundamental change in people's practices, fundamental change in the culture of how they drive. And it is essential, for example, that I would envisage that in primary and post-primary schools there would be educational programmes consistent with what's happening at the minute on road safety issues, but this would incorporate as well, because you're absolutely right. Parents have a reluctance to allow their children out to the street to play at the present time because fear of it. But we're trying to encourage and motivate people on, if it can be safer, can we make it safer? But we're going to make it safer when we do it all together, and, you know, getting all the stakeholders around the table, ensuring that it's an effective change. And it's not a matter of introducing legislation 1 month and the education takes place. It'll be a build-up to it. It might take a year or two of huge awareness and education before this bill would be introduced. I would have to say that. But again, thank you for your comments.
Lot Morrow?
Thank you, Pat. Welcome.
Okay.
In relation to something you've said there, do you have any figures for the number of people who have been of fatalities that there has been, where potentially a 20-mile speed limit would have had a different result?
No, I don't have them, to be honest, Lord Moore. I am kind of a very intensive research over the past number of years into those specific areas, and I'll certainly share that with the committee, not just those with fatalities, but serious injuries as well, and I will share that with the committee as soon as I receive it.
In relation to do you envisage this more in the inner city area
or are you saying no, it will go into rural areas in this respect, into the urban aspects of a rural area, housing developments and that sort of thing? Do you envisage that?
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I would agree with you. It is aimed at inner city where there's a higher density of cars using it. But clearly you couldn't not introduce it in small villages in the rural areas where there's a high level of pedestrians and possibly cyclists as well. So it is for the small residential areas, whether they are, but clearly within the wider city centres across all our towns and villages, I would see a situation where it would be introduced there.
And I think if I'm quoting you right when you said you have no idea of costs at this stage.
No, because it's trying to define, as Cathal Boland has said, definitively, are we going for road signing or signing? Are we going for road markings? Are we going for furniture change? Are we going for the width of the roads? So there's a bit of work that has to be done to find out, because costing will have an impact on it. But I want to get it right, and that's why I'm not rushing into the chamber with this at the next stage. I'm taking as much time consulting with the Regional Development Committee, consulting with yourself, and having a further extensive consultation with local councillors on the ground to hear what their opinions would be as the most effective way of doing it.
In relation to traffic calming measures, do you feel that traffic calming measures would have the same impact, or do you feel that your legislation would have a greater impact, bearing in mind that traffic calming measures are very visible things? 20-mile-per-hour speed limits are delivered by signage. So therefore educating us all as road users, do you not think that traffic calming measures would have a more direct, effective and equal, at least an equal impact to what we're envisaging here?
Lord Mayor, there's absolutely no doubt that traffic calming measures, as we know as in ramps, are an effective way of reducing speed immediately going into an area because you're forced to stop. But the evidence in other places, whether it be in Bristol, whether it be in Helden in Germany, clearly indicates that legislative change here from 30 to 20 has a significant impact on the reduction, and the evidence is there. And as I said earlier on, I would encourage the committee to, through their own research, to get the information on areas where it has been good practice, best practice, but the outputs have been clear and concise. I think it's a multitude, Lord Mayor. If you're asking me a direct question, I think road traffic calming measures are good, they work, and they do reduce, but not every area has them. There's hundreds and not thousands of areas across Northern Ireland that don't have those same road traffic calming measures. Maybe as a result that there isn't a history to meet the criteria as the Chair alluded to earlier on. And that's why, it is a mindset, and you made the point to yourself, we all need to change our habits. And I would agree with you, and that's why it has to come for the next generation, this legislation, where ultimately it would mean a huge change in their habits.
Do you envisage then, if this legislation, can it be changed by bylaws? Can bylaws not be introduced to restrict certain streets and avenues to 20 miles per hour? Just as I understand, it can be done to change a street from a two-way to a one-way. I understand that can be done by bylaw.
Well, clearly,
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. And neither am I. Not going to be. But I think clearly in preparation for the bill from the Bill's office, it's clear and obvious that it would require primary legislation to the House to make that ultimate change. I don't think there is any devolved powers that would enable local councils, either in bylaws or anywhere else, to change that. But I'm open, maybe someday out there you might find it is. And again, I'm sure your own researcher or others will pick this up today and we can get a bit of clarity around it.
And Chair, I find that for my own experience has been for every one individual that wants traffic calming measures, there's at least one that doesn't want them.
That's true.
And the one can live virtually opposite each other in the same street.
Yeah.
Now, if we had, for instance...
I've had that experience in my constituency.
Yes, I think we've all had that experience where we... where I know in one particular case where we got traffic calming measures there, and within a year we got there was one petition, we'll say, with 150 names. We got one a year later with 300 names saying it's now time to take them away. Had enough. So they weren't doing their job, or they were causing. Do you feel, Pat, that potentially, if you had 20 miles per hour speed limits, that this is going to again cause more congestion instead of assisting the free flow of traffic?
No, there's no evidence, and certainly it has come up during the consultation, but nobody has identified that as a real issue, that it would slow traffic down, the flows in city centres would be any or much
that
more
busier.
That mean
they couldn't get any worse?
But clearly, in city centres where there is delays, people are travelling in much less than 10 miles per hour, never mind 30 miles per hour, because that's what city centres are. There's clearly, over the past decade, a much higher increase in the number of people who own cars as well. And that's primarily the reason why it's important that you have legislation, because of the high increase in drivers, that we slow them down.
Well, I'm sitting for instance, at Sprucefield this morning from 9:20, and I got here, I think, at 10 o'clock, 10:30 rather, sat on the West Link for at least 50 minutes. And I'm just wondering if there was streets off that where they were 20 miles per hour. I suspect I would have been sitting at Stanmore roundabout, which is at Dungannon, by the way, trying to merge onto the motorway. But a journey that would normally take 50 to 60 minutes is taking an hour and 45 minutes or so. Do you not think that potentially this could further cause congestion in areas like that? No, even spilling onto our
I don't honestly, and I have to travel from Derry 3, possibly 4 days a week, and the congestion I get is when you're coming to Toom and you're bumpery bumper, and you come into Belfast, you're bumpery bumper. I don't see it having any detrimental effect on the flows, because in small residential areas you're decreasing the level down to. I really don't see it. But again, the earlier point is so important. It is a challenge. It is important that we get it right. If legislation is going to be brought forward, we need to educate people and make them aware of those changes.
And do you not feel that, I know you mentioned schools, which is a good point, where we have to be ultra careful, because there's a lot of small children, and potentially some of them moving across the road. With all the signage that now exists, I suspect, at most, if not all of our schools, the markings on the road, and sometimes the flashing lights, and sometimes the patrol lady or the lollipop man or woman. Do you not think that that's adequate for schools, or do you think?
No, I don't, because when you drive close to a school, it's only within 30 or 40 yards you realise that you're coming close to a school. Where if you're making an ultimate change of having that particular area where the school is, a 20 mile per hour zone, then you're immediately informing drivers to slow down, whether it be road signs or traffic signs or whatever is necessary. But I don't think there's enough being done to calm traffic around schools. I take your point about lights and signage, but it's within a very short period, and drivers are on top of it before they realise, to be quite honest. And I think you would accept that point as well, isn't it?
Do we have any, Chair, figures for fatalities around schools within the past 10, 15 years?
Again, that's something that can be picked up. I would have no doubt that unfortunately there probably has been.
I can recall an incident whenever I was at school. A pupil who was at the school at the same time got off the bus and walked out, and of course was killed instantly. He moved from behind the bus. Yeah. But that was in a rural area, so it was, where there was no, there would have been none of this. But anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ian Mill.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Pat, for your presentation. I'm very interested in what you're going to do here, or what you're trying to do, but I see speed ramps there as a replacement for lack of enforcement, by police, right? All of these things are brought about because they're much handier to put in place rather than to have police on the spot all day, every day, right? And I suppose, it makes some sense. But in housing estates that you're talking about, in my own area, especially old estates, the problems there is that fatalities and injuries have come about because of on-street parking. We have a situation in some estates, and I think it's a point worth making here, or I wouldn't make it, that part of this should be allowing DOE to allow people to make the slope into their homes, to off-street parking, or else provide parking within the estate, for cars. Because if you go into any of the estates where I come from, the old ones that was built in the 60s, they never allowed for parking. They just built houses one on top of the other, no parking facilities. And of the incidents that has happened down my way, it was children coming out playing on the streets and jumping out from behind parked cars. And I don't think it would have mattered, if it was 10 mile an hour, 20 mile an hour, or whatever. I think if you took the cars off the street by allowing people to park within the fronts of their homes, it would be a positive step forward. But all in all, I want to make that point there. All in all, I would support it if it eliminates the possibility of death or injuries, to anyone.
Well, I take your point, and in a number of large urban areas in the city, for example, particularly around the McGee campus in the city, there's huge problems on and around on-street parking. And it does, and I agree with you, I have no instance in there where children, unfortunately, have come out. But the point being, if you can instill in drivers a sense that you can end in there, it's only 20 miles per hour, 1 in 5 chance of losing your life if it's 30, 1 in 40 if it's 20. And that's a huge difference. But again, it's a huge mindset change, it's a huge cultural change. It will need years of preparation, of awareness, of education, and advertising to ensure that happens as well.
No, I agree. It's an educational thing, and it's a mentality change and all of that. But if you want to go into the argument of speed and all of that, you need to think of with a speed limit of 60 mile an hour or 70 mile an hour on a motorway. Yet and withal we produce cars that do 140 or 150 mile an hour. So if you want to go into the whole thing of changing people's mindsets, we need to go on to the car manufacturers. We need to go on to the programs about speed TV and all of those things. So it's a really big ask.
No, I think it is a good question, and it is something in our early days of the all-party group in road safety, where that subject matter was a very live one, and you can accelerate to over 100 mile within a few seconds as well. It's another subject matter maybe the committee could get their teeth into, but it's down to manufacturers. Yeah. I'm not sure how you can legislate for them. They have I don't drive myself, so I'm not sure how you could legislate for
water. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you.
John?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Pat, for that. Just a couple of questions around the areas. I did note you indicated in your presentation that the norm should be 20 miles per hour, and you had to make a case for making it any up to 30 or whatever. Could you explain that a wee bit further? Because I would have thought maybe that the norm might have been 20 and then the case was made to bring, or the norm would have been 30 and the case was made to bring it down to 20, but you seem to indicate the opposite.
No, unless maybe I misrepresented myself. Clearly, I'm trying to convince the committee and others in this House that there's good reasons, rationale, for reducing it from 30 down to 20. Others in their submissions have said we should be looking at other areas where 60 mile down to 50. I'm saying my own role in this here, simply and very clearly, is 20 is plenty. And small residential areas that could have an ultimate impact on road safety.
Okay. And just again, I know Lord Morrow touched on it, but give me a further flavour of where that would be implemented. By the way, I'm not opposed to all this, but I'm trying to just establish where it would be. In housing developments, I think, is obviously one of the key areas, but I'm thinking of through villages was quite a lot of pedestrians, and a couple maybe not far from yourself that I'm thinking of, just off the top of my head. There's scores of them around Northern Ireland, but I'm thinking of even new buildings in Maghera-Mason, where it's a drive-through village. I'm just wondering, would the village actually itself be 20 miles an hour as well?
I think that's a good example that Tom has highlighted. New buildings would be an example and model where I would be saying that would be good practice to reduce from 30 to 20. But in the through road leaving, going to Stapan, you couldn't interfere with the mileage and the speed limits on that road. And in those areas, and there's many of them like new buildings, small villages, I think they would see a big difference and the quality of life. They would see a big difference, and I mentioned the point earlier, increasing confidence, not just in cyclists, but in parents with children, but older people in our community that might feel safer on the roads as well.
But my point is, or my question was, you would actually see that the village of New Buildings and Mahermason being down to 20 miles an hour?
Within the small areas, but not on the main road.
Not on the main road?
Not on the main road.
Okay.
Not on the...
But within the small areas of the housing development?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Alban?
Thank you very much, and you're very welcome, Pat, and I think you're to be commended for bringing this forward. Very, very interesting presentation indeed, and I was struck by your reference to the fact that there are some areas that have 20-mile speed limits already. Has there been any analysis done of the effect of this in areas in Northern Ireland, or have you any information about them?
No, I don't. And some of the areas that the department are proposing haven't even been introduced yet. So, you know, they're very early stages of pilot projects, but clearly the department has viewed this and seen in other areas where it is making a difference. And like other areas, you know, I quoted some of the areas where pilot projects have taken place, and the result of the pilot projects, there clearly was outputs that enabled a decision to be made in a much easier context, because the evidence was there. It was based on outputs. It was based on less traffic accidents on the road, less fatalities. But more important for a lot of groups who have made a submission, cycling organisations, Sustrans, the huge difference it makes to encourage and motivate people to get on their bicycle or just to go out and have a walk within their own communities. I think that's a difference. But you're absolutely right. We would like to see in those areas where either it has been introduced or they're intending to introduce that there's a study, and we see the facts coming out of that study, evidence-based, and what difference it could have made.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and I'm sure in due course that those studies will be made available. Have you had any discussions or any indication from the PSNI in relation to their attitude?
Well, the police believed that they didn't, you know, they were resisting it. They weren't forcibly opposed to it.
Yes.
Similar to points made by Ian earlier on, you know, the police at the present time have the responsibility for the management of traffic and speeding on our roads. This would only mean a change from 30 to 20. They're still having that responsibility and duty of care to be managing, ensuring and deterring people who are committing an offence. And we are in circumstances as well, we have to be conscious of the pressures on policing. But we're also conscious of, when we're going forward, we're trying to ensure that, you know, neighbourhood policing that was envisaged and the new beginning to policing, but the mere fact that you're patrols in the area would be a deterrent on themselves, and also be there to ensure that there's a deterrent of people who may outrageously flaunt the law of speeding through areas, residential areas, where it's completely out of order. So, again, there's a lot of measures need to be introduced, but we need ownership of the policing going forward to ensure that from an early stage they're part of the process and part of the campaign, and maybe doing much more than they're presently doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Wish you well, Pat.
I just want to follow that on then. Pat, are you saying that DRD already has power to reduce speeds from 30 to 20 miles per hour in some areas?
Well, the Department of Regional Development have instigated 3 or 4 projects that are deemed pilot projects, and I think in legislative terms, because it's a pilot project, you don't need legislation to bring that forward.
Right.
Because it's only a pilot. You're not fundamentally changing the law. But it will be interesting, as Alban has said, to see the outcomes and outputs from that. Exactly where they are, in many homes within the area, the difference it made to the quality of life for children, for older people, and also for cyclists.
So obviously there is an intention maybe to change the law already. Is that what the RD, to reduce the speed in some roads?
Well, if I thought that was the case, I would allow them to do it, believe me. but I sense at this stage that there isn't a desire to bring forward legislation to change it.
Yeah. Okay. Ian McCree?
Yeah, it's actually one of the questions I planned to ask you. In the sense of what discussions you've had with the minister around. I know, and firstly, I apologise for missing your presentation, but it is something that I do agree with the principle of. But I know where there have been these pilots in the past, generally have worked.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that the department. I'm not sure whether we'll say they're doing it on the cheap or not. But, they're obviously looking to you now to do their work if that's
Possibly.
But, so I take it from what you're saying, the department. Have you been in discussions with the minister, for example, and senior officials around what their intentions are?
No, I haven't, and in fact, I haven't even spoken to Mark H. Durgan at all yet. I haven't even had a conversation with him. I thought it was my duty to come to the committee first, to come to the members, to hear opinions from them before I even take it onto plenary, for example. Certainly, in part of the preparation to take it onto plenary, it is essential that I have a discussion with both Danny Kennedy and Mark H. Durgan. But I want to get as much information, and that's why I've extended the consultation to councils. To want to meet them, I'm giving them as much information as I can that might help. And genuinely, I say, although might have been jibing earlier on, as a result of this, the department saying, look, we don't mind taking this on, I'll be saying,
over to you. Over to you, yes, yeah.
I appreciate that. Obviously, a number of members have focused on the fact that this is an education process, and I'm not sure you're going to get everybody jumping up and down at the potential of a reduced speed limit. I know I think it's Ardaclave have a temporary 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Do you envisage that being possible, or do you just believe that it should be in all areas that you feel meet the criteria should be reduced to 20 miles per hour? I can see a number of examples where a temporary 20-mile-an-hour would work in school hours type, but I know in that Ardaclave one, it is very difficult if you're going along that stretch of road and you see an open road, not to sort of put the foot down. But the temporary one seems to work there. Do you envisage, didn't notice it or even any of the questions or anything, but is that something that could be considered?
Before taking on the bill, you have to reflect on the outputs from the bill. And clearly, to make a difference in road safety, to make a difference on social changes, to make a difference on a much more healthier living approach to all of this, I think it needs a fundamental change. We could be talking for the next decade or two and introducing a pilot measure here and a pilot measure there, that I'm not sure in all of those families who live in that community may see a difference. I think if we're going to go down the journey, and my journey on this legislation will be the enforcement across Northern Ireland on areas, small residential areas, where we can in fact bring forward a reduction in speed. But you're right, people will disagree with it. People will find it's Big Brother, people will find different reasons, but I think it will require a huge build-up of momentum in the schools, as I said, primary and post-primary, within driving instructors, but also it needs a media campaign. Clearly environment have a huge responsibility in road safety, but if it was going forward, I would hope that there would be a collaborative approach between both ministers and departments to actually have the effect and the desired effect. And the desired effect, and I say it again, there's only one reason I'm on this journey, to hopefully that small measure can help reduce losing lives on the road or serious injury to people.
Surely, I don't know the answer, so I'm asking in the sense of, I don't believe that a pilot here and there is acceptable.
Yeah.
That's why I believe that some legislative process should be in place. But within that, where it's more practical to have a temporary, in front of a school, that maybe not a built-up area other than the school being there, that it shouldn't, in fact, be a temporary 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. You know, is that something that you'd be willing to consider as an option? You know, rather than bend the ditch over saying it should be at 20 mile an hour for all of these areas, if in fact there's no real requirement other than during that school opening hours, as it were.
Clearly, and during my presentation, I identified a number of areas where there would be a priority, and that would be at schools, it would be at youth clubs, it would be at school playgrounds, it would be at areas where there are football pitches, where there are high concentration of people travelling the road. I don't rule out any option, I don't rule out any proposal, I don't rule out any suggestion coming from yourself, Ian, who clearly has an interest in the same subject matter as well, and that's why I'm here, Chair, just to solicit your support, first of all, clearly wanted for the bill. But if the committee feel there's other alternatives or proposals, then I'm keen to hear them, either formally or individually with any of the members.
And finally, I suppose, whilst we all haven't heard a dissenting voice in here in respect of trying to tackle this whole issue around road safety, the enforcement is key, no matter what we do. And I suppose we welcome Ian Millen calling for more police to tackle this. You know, we're united in that sense, and you know,
not just yet. We're working on it. We're working on it. Is this on an all-Ian basis?
But
it's on an all-Ian basis.
But nonetheless, enforcement is key in all of this, and we can put up 20 mile an hour signs across the whole of Northern Ireland, housing estates, in front of schools, and let's face it, how many tickets do we anticipate being handed out for speeding in those areas? It's normally when they're on the motorways and all other aspects that you see the police out in force, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I know, for example, in a road outside Cookstown, the police did a spot of speed checking, and there was one car in a very, an area that was 30 mile an hour, and I know the person, and I think it was over 80 mile an hour, and the difficulty I had was schools don't want the police to be in the areas because it's their parents of their children. Not all schools, but it's some that I've experienced, that some schools don't want their parents to be caught speeding. I think that's ludicrous. But I do know that has been the case. But enforcement, regardless, that is the key thing. And yes, we can put as much legislation in place as possible, but if we don't have the enforcement, if there isn't that change in the mindset of the enforcers, that the 30 mile an hour limits, or indeed 20 in what you're proposing, is as equally as important, because that's where the build-up of people are.
Yeah, Chair, I totally and utterly agree. I think it is a welcome statement. I think when we looked at the other areas that I have referenced earlier, a number of other areas I could have referenced, they had the fullest cooperation of the policing service in going forward. I think if we're trying to create a safer environment, as I'm saying, and road safety on the roads, then we need the police on this journey with us. We need them involved in the local area and the public police partnerships involved in this, in terms of highlighting, promoting greater levels of road safety. But you're right, it can only be done when there's deterrence. And people know fine well that if you're caught, you're going to lose your 3 points, you're going to be fined. And we need that direct approach from the police, and certainly I will be meeting them again, and hopefully I can convince them of the merits. But Ian was right earlier on, if they're not doing it under 30, there's something badly wrong. And we need them coming forward to support the safer environment, safer roads, and 20's plenty. If it happens in other parts of Britain and the UK, it's beyond me why there would be resistance here to ensure that people are not getting away. The example that Ian has said, it is outrageous if it was a parent to be on a road where his own children are on at that excessive speed. I think it's unacceptable.
Madness. Okay. Well, thank you very much and best of luck.
Okay.
Yes, yes. On your journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, then we moved on to the next item. We have departmental officials here. Members, as you all recall, during our scrutiny stage, departmental officials have said all along that there will be a lot of guidance, statutory guidance, to supplement the bill. So they have now put forward a consultation, a public consultation on the mandatory code of conduct. The main areas of consultation are: one, the rules of general conduct for councillors; two, the registration and disclosure of interest; three, rules regarding lobbying; and four, for application of the code with regards to planning matters. So a copy of the consultation paper has been tabled with you, and if I can welcome Julie, Mylene, Fiona, and Kathy. Kathy's new to us.
Yes.
Is that right, Kathy?
Thank
yes,
you.
yes, haven't seen you before. Yeah, yeah. Oh, John's here. Yeah, yeah. Yes. We're missing Linda. That's all.
We let her have the day.
Very kind of you, John, to let the ladies sit in front. Okay.
Safer position, John. That's the safer one.
Very pleased to see now the consultation's out. So we'll be starting now, is that right?
As soon as we leave here, we're hoping to get the consultation issued this afternoon.
Okay. And then out for 12 weeks, is that
It'll be an 8-week consultation.
8 weeks. Okay.
It's just because it is in many ways like a piece of subordinate legislation, and it has to be laid in draft before the Assembly and agreed by the Assembly before it can come into being. We really, timescale-wise,
yes,
to have this in place for when the new councils come in, it would need to be an 8-week consultation. But we had already carried out the pre-consultation exercise with key stakeholders and have revised the code as a result of comments that we received as a result of the pre-consultation, which was undertaken in January. The pre-consultation document was sent to the political reference group, NILGA, SOLAS, the Commissioner for Complaints, Equality NI, the Local Government Reform Joint Forum and the Legislation Working Group. And we received comments from a member of the political reference group, from NILGA, from the Commissioner for Complaints, Equality NI, NIPSA, and also members of the Legislation Working Group. And an awful lot of the comments were actually about issues which aren't included in the code. There are more comments were about the procedures and also about planning issues, which will be covered in other documents. So, for example, there was a lot of comments about how the investigation and adjudication procedure will work. But the Commissioner for Complaints is working on guidance which will actually set out how that will work. And also, people were asking for clarity in relation to planning. Now, amendments have been made on the planning section as a result of that, but equally, our colleagues in Planning Policy Division will be issuing guidance specifically in relation to planning. And the issue of training was also highlighted in the comments, and that there needs to be appropriate training in relation to the Code of Conduct. And the department is working with the Local Government Training Group, councils, NILGA, and the Commissioner for Complaints on, in general, on capacity building for the incoming councillors and councils. But this will include specific training in relation to the Code of Conduct. The main provisions that have been made to the code following the pre-consultation is that a lot of people had raised issues about, it needs to be a bit more clear, reordered in a manner that makes it absolutely clear that what standards of conduct are expected of councillors and the principles that will apply, and also very clarity in relation to what the consequences of being in breach of the code would be. So other than reordering the code to make it clearer, in addition, the following main amendments have been made.
Sorry, can you stop then? I just want to welcome the children. Which school are you from? Oh, very good. You're very welcome. And we're talking to the departmental officials about code of conduct, how people should behave in our new councils. Okay?
I get you.
Okay, sorry.
Behave better in schools.
In schools, yeah.
And both sides too? You're from the same school too? Is that right? You're very welcome. Sorry.
Okay, yes. Other than reordering the code to provide a bit more clarity on the principles and the rules that will apply, the main changes that have been made are in relation to the principle on promoting good relations. Several of the respondents to the pre-consultation asked for that to be amended, and we've done that. And,
amended to what extent?
We've amended it so that it more closely reflects what's in the Northern Ireland Act, the duty in relation to good relations in the Northern Ireland Act. We've also included, at the request of respondents, a paragraph on political opinion, which is similar to the paragraph that's in the MLA's Code of Conduct in relation to political opinion. It's actually the same wording. And also, as a result of our discussions with the committee on the pre-consultation, we've amended the paragraph which sets out when the code will apply, which was an issue I think that Mr Elliott had raised. And we also
at all times,
yes,
including walking the dog.
And we've also amended the date on which the code will have effect as a result of some comments that Mr Weir had raised in relation to planning. So that section has been amended to clarify that the planning section will only apply from the 1st of April 2015, but the rest of the code will apply before then. So, as I say, the public consultation hopefully going out this afternoon. That will be an 8-week consultation, and we're happy to take any comments. That
yes, in terms of the good relations, when we were doing a scrutiny, I think with CAJ asked us if we could put in an amendment defining good relations, and I think we talked to you about it, and I think you said that maybe would be further clarified in the guidance. I mean, have you done that?
Well, we're still working, on the guidance, but on the code itself, we actually have amended the principle on good relations so that it reflects more closely what's in the Northern Ireland Act. And actually, the wording that's used is very similar to what's in the Northern Ireland Act now.
Okay, and that is like promoting good relations,
yes,
or something like
right.
that. Is that
yes.
Pay regards to promoting good relations?
Yes. Got that there, William? Sorry. Yes, it's you should act in a way that is conducive to promoting good relations by providing a positive example for the wider community to follow, and it seeks to promote a culture of respect, equity and trust, and embrace diversity in all of its forms.
Okay. Okay.
And that was the wording that was provided by Equality NI. That actually were one of the respondents who suggested that that wording should be changed, and also a member of the political reference group.
Yes, very good. Okay. Carol?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and once again, thank you very much for your presence. Kathy, you're welcome to the first meeting. Just obviously, there was great concern, and there still is a lot of concern in relation to the actual decision-making process and the protection of councillors,
yes,
especially in planning. And I mean, I know we're going out for an 8-week consultation, but I think that's one of the key elements, and that's one of the things that's been raised with me on a number of occasions. I'm just wondering, I mean, your initial views on that, and anything that has come from the likes of NILGA and represented bodies, how we can get around that pure and instill confidence. And I know there has to be a number of capacity building measures brought in place to ensure that they have the confidence to make those decisions. but it's initial stages. I know it happens elsewhere. Wondering what we've learned from other areas in terms of better practice across the water, or wherever, even south in relation to decision-making process.
Yeah, it's a very important point, Cathal, and we have taken that on board. As I say, the code itself will be supplemented by guidance, which will enhance its understanding. Along with that, as you said, there will be numerous capacity building programmes. In addition to that, the developers of the guidance are working closely with the Commissioner, and also we are, in the next few weeks, we will be travelling across the water to London to see at first hand planning committees in operation. We're also going to see colleagues in Wales in respective planning committees and operations, and we will be liaising with the RTPI, etc., and other various bodies to bring best practice to the guidance. We are aware that it's absolutely essential that the guidance supplements and provides clarity on the code so that there's no misunderstanding in respect of that. We also feel that it's important. We've made a number of recommendations, particularly in terms of providing where planning committees, council should consider having legal advisors on their planning committees, and if in doubt, seek advice from legal advisors in respect of the code and how it impacts upon them.
And just following on the next point, Chair, I mean, obviously I was going to ask you about the make-up of that actual body. You know, obviously the head planner, lead planner, and obviously the councillors. In the make-up of the bodies, making the decisions elsewhere, what is the actual make-up of it in terms of office? In terms of making the decisions?
Of the planning committee. We will be developing, are working on developing a regional protocol which will provide recommendations to the various councils on the make-up of planning committees. As I say, in the next few weeks we're going to go to the various other jurisdictions to establish best practice, and on the basis of that we will be making a number of recommendations to councils for them to decide how they will make up their planning committee, what size of the planning committee should be, who should sit on the planning committee, and should they have legal advisors on the planning committee. And we intend, as I said, to develop a regional protocol on that.
Right, and just finally, Chair, because I think this is the key element. The committee will make a decision that's going to be compliant with the policies, whatever it is at the minute. And clearly there's concerns over some of the policies, and I know we're going through the SPPS at the minute. In terms of, how do you see that process? I mean, are you taking that into consideration in terms of, you'll establish a committee, but clearly there's questions coming, especially from rural communities, and whether or not actual policy fit for purpose. I mean, because I'm concerned that no matter how good the committee is, when you set a precedent or when you make your first decision, that's your benchmark for the rest of it. What consideration are you given in relation to that?
Well, planning is the planning decisions are, it's a plan-led system, and it will be based on the development plan, which will be formulated by the councils and agreed by the department. The policies then, planning decisions are taken based on the material considerations, planning policy, neighbour notification, consultation. The same process will apply. And decisions will be taken on that basis. The planning committee will operate and be provided decisions by officers on recommendations based on material considerations of a planning application.
Well, thanks very much. I'm sure the only reason I bring it up because I know one is consultation in relation to this issue, but also body work being carried out in relation to formulating a new plan-led system anyway in terms of the SPPS, and I hope that people are encouraged to take part and engage and participate in that process. We don't want to see it first time people asking, we should have said this, or although it may be an opportunity in the future for councils to change all of that. But thank you very much for your presentation.
Sure, there will be a lot of responses from the public for you.
Good luck with it.
In terms of the committee, planning committee, are you planning to include independent people from outside?
Chair, the planning committee, as we understand it, will be the responsibility of the council. We will make a number of recommendations in relation to who we think should sit on the planning committee and the numbers on the planning committee, but that will be the responsibility, as I understand it, of the council.
Yeah. Would you recommend that they may have an independent person?
Well, we are recommending there's an independent legal advisor available to the committee.
What they call legal planners?
It's something obviously we would.
Okay. Right, Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Just probably on the last point, I mean, I suppose there's a distinction between having somebody independent to advise. I think it would be wrong to have somebody as a voting member of a, if you've got elected members on planning, dealing with planning, it should be up to them in that regard. Somebody who doesn't have a mandate shouldn't be in the same position, but I think there's a distinction on that. But just I suppose to touch on one issue on the planning side of it, and I appreciate this is, I suppose some of the planning stuff is slightly a wee bit tangential to the code of conduct that we're straying away from, but whenever you intend to bring recommendations to, whenever you intend to bring recommendations of sort of draft regional guidance, if you like, in terms of, I suppose, if you like, broad composition side of it from that point of view, will that be like a range of options? Because one thing, leaving Belfast aside in terms of scale on it, I mean, there would be a strong school of thought which would say that the planning committee should be every member of the council, because if you have some of the members on it and some not on it, given the fact that the level of restrictions that are there, you're creating a situation where you will give a range of councillors completely sort of carte blanche to campaign, while on the other hand you're going to have a situation where councillors in a multi-member constituency type basis, and this is where sometimes we can differ from other jurisdictions, have their hands completely tied, and it's better at least to have all councillors on a level playing field in that regard. So I'm just wondering, will that potentially be one of the options that at least will be offered, and it be a question of council can choose from a range of options, or would you be putting a sort of prescriptive model?
Well, I think once we go on our fact-finding missions in the next few weeks, we'll be looking at best practice and we'll be taking advice from the various jurisdictions. Obviously, I think there would be a number of options.
Yes, we'd like to leave flexibility with councils within a certain range, but we'd be saying here's the best practice that we have discovered, and if you wish to follow this, that would be great. But if not, within certain limitations, you can choose.
Turning back just in terms of the consultation issues, there's a couple of points. First of all, you list on, I suppose, at pre-consultation, obviously you've had a degree of targeted input from stakeholders. And you've mentioned, for instance, you've mentioned NILGA, you've mentioned various bodies. And again, I don't know whether the information was sought on a confidential basis, but you've mentioned simply 2 members of the Legislative Working Group and a member of the Political Reference Group. Are you in a position to tell us who those are?
Yes, it was an alliance member of the Political Reference Group.
Okay. Which one? As there's 2 type of thing? Stuart Dixon, okay. And 2 members of the Legislative Working Group?
Were Belfast City Council and representative, chief executive from an officer.
Okay, that's okay. I mean, I wasn't sure whether they were just individuals. The other point, I suppose, and again, it's not some directly answer, but taking up Cathal's point in relation to, I think there's a massive job of work to be done here in terms of capacity building, which I think you'd accept. Because the important thing with this is obviously not just ruling out where people are doing things wrong, but given if you've got a new code of practice where people may do things not realise that they're, particularly whenever it's a changing environment, I think it would be very useful whenever you get some meat on the bones of what you have in mind for capacity building, if you were to send sort of a separate report in connection with that would be helpful. Yes. Chair, the other thing, just see I'd be happy to leave it until we've dealt with the remainder of the code of conduct. There was a separate issue of obviously on the legislation bit that's coming up whenever we have the officials.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to leave that to the...
Okay. After everyone's asked a question. In terms of lobbying, I mean, all of us would have been lobbied about planning issues, and I'm sure councillors, many councillors would have been lobbied. Can you very briefly maybe talk to us about this rules regarding lobbying?
Well, it is within the remit of any councillor to lobby, as you've said, Chair. But I think the important distinction is a councillor on a planning committee should not lobby to are for or against a planning application until the material considerations of that planning application have been considered and a recommendation made. I think that's the distinction. Outside of the planning committee, the councillor may lobby for or for and against an application.
But the councillors on the committee shouldn't do it. Sorry.
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't voice an opinion for and against an application until the planner has considered the material considerations of that application. To do so may leave themselves open to challenge by an outside person.
Okay. But usually we lobby before the decision is made.
Well, the lobbying. If you're not sitting on a decision-making committee, the councillors can continue to lobby.
Okay.
But they just have to be very careful if they're sitting on
the
a
decision-making body.
Yes.
You don't lobby. Okay, that's quite clear. Okay. No more questions. Cathal, you want to come back?
No, sure. I was going to ask a question about the information process. Because obviously, you have to put all is on file and all is on the computer nowadays. It's just there may be some sense that, as part of a proper process, sometimes, the councils have to meet to engage in certain things. I mean, it's very hard not to have a planning process where you're trying to come to a decision with proper informed information and stuff starts to, it's like you say, but in some cases stuff can leak out and then it makes it harder for councillors to make a decision properly. Do you know what I mean? But it's something obviously you can't do. I mean, the stuff needs to be placed on record. Isn't that right? All of the information needs to be placed on record.
Yes.
Right, sorry. It's just when you mention that, Chair, because sometimes in making decisions, it's, some of the councillors I've talked to are concerned, obviously, they will be lobbied on it. Clearly, they have to be proper informed decision on the information provided, be it all material considerations, everything else. And that's going to be a wee step that they need in the capacity building to understand. Do you know what I mean?
That's where the capacity building will
Exactly,
have to come in, and the training will have to come in
just
terms of what what they do in those situations.
They can listen to a lobbyist. They can.
No, I agree with you. And that's part of the whole.
Make it clear they can't make a decision until.
It'll be a total change from them,
It is.
compared to what they do now. That's all I'm saying. Just no, it's grand. Just a comment only here.
It's just maybe one thing then about the appeal mechanism, because the Minister now has changed his mind after seeking legal advice and speaking to Mr Frawley. So do you know what the legal position is, legal advice is?
The legal advice, the Commissioner had shared his legal advice. He'd got senior Crown Counsel advice, and the Minister then asked for independent legal advice from that before he made his decision. And it was two aspects of the legal advice. One was, would judicial review be, provide the same sort of appeal mechanism that an appeals process would? We had been looking at one stage at what was in the Scottish legislation in terms of the grounds for appeal, and that could judicial review cover the same issues? And the other was on the constitutional position of the Commissioner. And it's the Commissioner was very much of the view that there's no other area in which a decision of the Commissioner can be challenged on appeal. It is always by judicial review, and that this would actually be creating a difference in relation to the appeals mechanism for Code of Conduct compared to all other ombudsmen. So that was the basis of the legal advice, and the legal advice that we got back was yes, there would be an issue around the position of the Commissioner. And I think the Commissioner is very much of the view that if an appeals mechanism was introduced, then it would be difficult for the Commissioner to carry out both the investigation and adjudication role. That they would be able to carry out the investigation role, but not adjudication. And that the grounds specified in the Scottish legislation for appeal are very, very similar. They would actually cover the same grounds that judicial review would cover. So that was the legal advice that we obtained.
So why do they have that appeal mechanism different to a judicial review then? Why would they have? Do they have both?
Appeals against the Commissioner is always by judicial review.
Okay. So I thought you said people can go to the High Court for appeal in Scotland.
In Scotland, because it's not actually the Ombudsman. It's because it's a different system of how it works. In other jurisdictions, you have this, distinction between the investigation and adjudication.
Okay.
So, and in Wales, where it's the Welsh Ombudsman carries out the investigation, the decision is actually made by an adjudication panel in Wales. So, any appeal to the High Court is made against that adjudication panel, not against the Commissioner for Complaints.
Okay.
Chair, I suppose just on that point, I still think it's important, and obviously the committee, I suppose to bring you up to speed, the committee's agreed this morning that it will be putting down amendments on that nature, and I think those amendments have got to go beyond judicial review. It's got to go to potentially to the merits of the case, but perhaps what it does maybe highlight, with reflection on whether this is something maybe we need to look at, is whether or not then the adjudication then should be done by the Ombudsman, that it maybe should be done separately in that regard, because I think the situation, and that is something which seems to pertain in Scotland and Wales in different forms on that side of it, the situation essentially that you can have a verdict against an individual, and I think this is where there's a distinction between this and the general position of the Ombudsman, that will be, if it makes a ruling against a government department or I think there's a different argument on it, but to have a situation which could have such a clear detrimental impact on an individual's position and have no right of appeal or no effective right of appeal, I think is something that is unjust. Now, whether that means, and obviously we've got the current legislation is going through, whether as part of the thing we then actually need to adjust, and maybe a writing of whatever is put through in terms of the code of conduct, that actually the final adjudication lies with a different body. We may have to change that side of things on it. But I think the idea of not having essentially not having appeal, or have it so restricted in terms of that it's only if it was completely unreasonable or there was a breach of procedure, I think is wrong on that.
One of the things we had, as we've always said, we will be reviewing this system after a couple of years, and one of the aspects that we were going to be considering under review was whether those two aspects needed to be, carried out by.
It may be as a result of both what happens in terms of the legislation over the next few weeks, and also then what happens in terms of the code of conduct as well. It may be that feel like that examination of that element to potentially change, it becomes front-loaded in that regard, and maybe something has to be done a lot quicker in that regard.
Yeah. And Peter, when you say appeal to the High Court, so how different is it appeal to the High Court and also going to a High Court for judicial review?
Because judicial review is restricted according to a range of administrative processes. So essentially it is on the grounds that... Process, or indeed there are other grounds as well, so that, for example, take a level of reasonableness, etc. Yeah. I suppose that one of the arguments is if you've got an appeal mechanism, I think, and this is maybe where we need to slightly drill down in this, and it might be something at further consideration stage, whether the appeal mechanism should cover, for example, the level of sanction on that, because again, it might be an argument that is disproportionate, and that's maybe not necessarily something that would necessarily get knocked out of judicial review, and I think that's where we need to find that. But I mean, in a general sense, judicial review can be quite narrow in its nature in that regard. I think we do need something that's a bit wider if we're looking at an appeal, because as I said again, with the best will in the world, you could be in a situation where somebody has been wrongly accused, they have been maybe found guilty according to this and sanctioned, and effectively their career could be wrecked, and if there's no proper mechanism for appeal on that side of things on it, then it's going to have a massive detrimental effect. And I think that is distinctive from the situation of an ombudsman's finding against a particular government body, because that government body, even if it's harshly treated, there's no probably massive particular implication for an individual as a result of that. There might be a bit of egg on the face of a particular official or whatever, but it's not as if immediately they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose the public reputation. The reputation of the department or a department may I think that's where there's a degree of distinction in that regard. So, I mean, I suspect there may be some degree of changes in the legislation, but this may be something that will have consequential knock-on as we need to look at things over the next few while.
Chair,
Yes,
I just really want to make a comment. Rising out of what Julia has said, and she gave particular emphasis to this. I mean, the Ombudsman, and this is reflected in the Minister's letter, is not just uncomfortable with the position, but sees it as almost a challenge to his office if there were to be, as it were, an appeal mechanism, because it fundamentally undermines the integrity of his position as an ombudsman. That's my reading of the position as presented by Julia and contained within the Minister's letter, because this is setting a precedent that his decision-making can be challenged. Now that is unprecedented. And therefore he makes that point if he were here, I think he'd be making that point very forcefully. And, we have accepted as a committee that there should be an amendment in principle to this part of the bill. But it seems to me if the Ombudsman is saying, look, I can investigate, but I can't adjudicate, it seems to me that any amendment that we put forward as a committee, and even though I dissented from that, I accept in principle that the committee wants to do that, it creates a complication in terms of the actual amendment, because you'd really need to be distinguishing between the investigation and the actual adjudication, as well as trying to fit in some sort of appeal mechanism.
Chair, I think there's two things in that. I mean, I think that's fairly...
Well, you can do either or.
Yeah, presumably in terms of, supposed to be fair, in terms of the actual amendment, the amendment can be clearly, I feel like, it is as a result of the appeal would be on the grounds of the adjudication, and that I thought could be made fairly clear in any sort of amendment that's put forward. It strikes me possibly one way around which could be relatively easily done, I would have thought. And again, because I presume obviously the Minister's position would be, ideally there's no need for an amendment in the first place, but it would be something then that could apply if you take on board what's been said by the Ombudsman or the Commissioner of Complaints. Then what could happen is if the amendment was passed, which then gave that right of appeal to the High Court on the result, and assuming then the Ombudsman say, well, actually, I don't regard that as being acceptable for my role then on the adjudication. At further consideration stage, an amendment could be put down which separated out adjudication and, for example, then said adjudication will then, more regulations as regards adjudication will be brought forward. You take it out of the hands directly of the Ombudsman, but can be brought forward by regulations by the Department, so that, that if you like, we dealt with then who dealt with the adjudication then, not maybe in the primary legislation, but in it. I would also say, I have to say, on reflection on this, I can understand an Ombudsman, and I appreciate the saying about the precedent, etc., an Ombudsman wanting to say, I want to be independent, and there's no problem with that. I don't think anybody would challenge independence. The idea, I have to say, which maybe also unprecedented in a different way, of essentially saying, my verdict on anything should never be challenged. It should be outside any form of challenge. Now, does the Ombudsman see himself as some form of God in that regard? This is I suppose one of the questions that gone back to the Greek and Roman times of who guards the guardians. If we have a situation where somebody can issue a verdict and they feel under no circumstances should that verdict ever be legally challengeable.
That's not true. You can go to judicial review.
Well, judicial review, again, never challenges on the basis purely of the merits of it, only if it's utterly on
reasonableness.
Yes, but reasonableness is not essentially a challenge purely on the merits. It is not saying was it got right or wrong. It is actually saying that it was so perverse that no reasonable person. It almost the hint of that there was some form of either madness on the one hand or corruption on the other side of it. That's ultimately, to some extent, the test of reasonableness. It's that no reasonable person could have come to that verdict. That is very different from saying, on the merits, you got this wrong, or you got the sanction wrong in that regard. And I have to say that sort of the idea that it seems to almost pervade, possibly from the Commissioner of Complaints, that they should be more or less unchallengeable outside of very, very extreme circumstances, or nothing that they should ever do should ever be appealed. You know, there seems to be a thinking behind that, which, personally speaking, I don't accept. However, if the way round it is that we allow for an appeal and may look then at further consideration stage for something which actually separates out the adjudication side from the investigation side, if the Ombudsman is taking a view of, no, I do not want my adjudications in any way challenged in that regard, and indeed make a provision that adjudication then is covered by way of subsequent regulations. That's maybe the way, in terms of who does that, that might be the way around it.
But Chair, I mean, I understand the point that Peter's making, and makes very well, but I mean, you're really talking about a constitutional issue here.
Yeah, I am.
And that's what the Commissioner is concerned about.
Yeah.
And it applies to ombudsmen throughout the UK. It's not just confined to here. And I don't think he's been specifically precious about his position. What he sees is his position as a constitutionally established position. And I think that's the problem. But the point I'm making anyway, Chair, is it's a wee bit more complicated than perhaps we first thought. Or first thought, sorry, and any amendments that we bring forward have to be very carefully looked at, and it's not just a straightforward matter. So that's all I'm saying to the committee.
And I'm concerned about unintended consequences if that's going to be, amended. To change the abuse system, that there will be an abuse system against his decision other than judicial review.
Yes.
That could be, unintended consequences for all the other, all the other judgments he's going to make.
Chair, then the easy way around that is then, as there seems to be a degree of discomfort, if there's going to be any level of challenge, the Commissioner of Complaints has basically said he seems to be uncomfortable with the idea of investigation, adjudication, and then being open to challenge on that basis, is then to separate out investigation and adjudication, have him doing the investigation and then having adjudication, and whether it's by way of a panel or whatever, having the adjudication to be done elsewhere. That's the way. I mean, and there's no therefore unintended consequences if that is pursued. But essentially, I have to say, mind you, the same token, if the unintended consequence is saying somebody's position can be appealed in one set of circumstances, well, it might actually be appealed elsewhere. I regard that as a fairly positive unintended consequence, if that's the case, to be perfectly honest on it. But I'll leave it there on that side of it.
Would the department be content to look at that? Changing.
Well, yes, we can look at it. The one thing I would say at this stage, it's actually quite a major change to the ethical standards framework. If we're to separate that out, but we can definitely look at it.
Sure, I mean, there is time as well from that point of view. If there's an amendment coming forward on the committee's behalf on it, I'd be more than happy. I'm going to say take a look and see what changes potentially be needed, if that is the case in terms of the Ombudsman. Might even, if time was permitted, even to bring someone forward at consideration stage so they could both be considered together. But I appreciate that wouldn't be in the committee's name because clearly the committee hadn't taken a view on it.
And the one other aspect, of course, is that if you do introduce a separate adjudication panel, that would be more costly than just the system that we're introducing at present. And that's just another.
Well, I think from that point of view, I mean, I think at the very least at this stage, and I think probably shouldn't entirely draft on the hoof in that regard. So I mean, it would. I think by way of an amendment, it would be to at least separate out the two, and then indicate that if you like, the regulations as regards any adjudication would be then brought forward in subsequent regulations or something worse to that effect might be the way to do that.
Okay, right, let me sum up on that then. I'll do my best. So the department's going to go and look at whether you can separate the adjudication, investigation and adjudication, but the minister is very firm on that there will not be an appeal mechanism going to the High Court, and it will be judicial review. So Peter's point is that we as a committee,
well, Chair, as a committee, I suppose we're committed to putting forward the amendment on the committee amendment on the appeals mechanism. Now, that, given what's said about the attitude of the local government, the Commissioner for Complaints, that obviously has a consequential bit. Whether that's dealt with at further consideration stage, or I think I'm certainly take a look at it to see if there's anything can be done at this stage by way of an amendment. But I appreciate that would be, unless we move into a longer time frame, that's something that couldn't be considered by the committee. I perfectly appreciate that. And it may not be something that can be made ready in time for next week either. So, that may or may not happen at consideration stage. It may be a consequential bit at further consideration stage.
Okay. The committee is going to look at then putting forward an amendment on this issue, on the appeal mechanism.
Well, we can look at that other issue and bring that before the Minister.
Okay. Another issue we want while you're here, you're good value for money today, Julie.
I think John's glad he's got himself on side.
You sent back to us a response in relation to the group committees or individual committees.
Can I substitute people?
Yes, get John in. Yes, John.
Please do.
We're finished. Right. So you sent this back and you gave us a table about group committees or single committees, and it clearly shows to us that grouped committees would be a lot more beneficial to the smaller parties and the independents, or fairer.
Yes.
So, but Schedule 4, remind me, what is now Schedule 4 and what is the amendment for Schedule 4?
Schedule 4 would be silent on this. I mean, if we were to go with the system of single committees being appointed, that schedule will cover that. But if it's that you are allocating across all of the committees, then obviously that schedule is silent on it, and there's a second stage that has to be carried out, which would require an amendment.
Chair, on that,
an amendment on the bill.
Yeah,
on Schedule 4.
Well, you could either do it, I think there's several ways. You could do it by guidance, by statutory guidance, and specify how that will be done, but that's guidance.
That's just guidance. Yeah.
The other ways of doing it would be to put something on the face of the bill, but as this process is actually, it would be quite complex to do that amendment, I think, before next week. The other way of doing it is to provide an enabling power to specify it by subordinate legislation, or to provide the department with a direction to allow the department to direct how that second stage will be done after consultation with, key stakeholders.
And how is that done? That direction would be put on the bill? You say it would be
No,
directed?
it would. Yes, you would need an amendment to the bill to give a power for the department to direct. Now, these are obviously options that all would need to be put to the Minister first, but those would be the options I think that would be available. But one of them wouldn't require an amendment to the bill, but then, as I say, it would just be guidance. It wouldn't actually be prescriptive as to how the second stage would be done. The other two ways, you would be providing an enabling power to allow it to be done. I think, John, you have looked further.
Because I think the issue, Madam Chair, is that whenever you do them grouped, you're simply identifying the number of members that a particular party can allocate across the various committees. Without a second stage, a party could then put more, decide to use the term pack a particular committee. So you need to have a second stage where you can actually say that an individual party can only have a maximum number of members of a committee. And that's where the second stage really comes in, when you go to the doing it across a number of committees. And that's the way the Assembly do it, where they calculate through how many seats on a committee, on all the committees that each party will have, and then there's a maximum number that each party can hold, and then it's worked out But I think that in some respects, in terms of the Assembly, the fact that you have the same size of committees, I think it becomes more complex, and that's where I think, as Julie says, maybe sort of a power of direction, because in councils you may have different sizes of committees. I think it would need some additional work, and I think the power of direction, if the minister is amenable to this, if it's proper, it provides you greater flexibility that you can sort of develop something, and if that proves to be not the right, creating unforeseen sort of circumstances, you could then revise that to ensure that the policy objective of ensuring the sort of that the committees on a council sort of are largely reflect the political balance of the council itself.
Yeah. Okay. So, but Schedule 4 does not provide for that.
No, not at the minute. No, it would provide for if you were assigning to places to committees on a committee by committee basis, but it wouldn't deal with grouping committees. So therefore, if that's what's needed, we need to make some form of amendment.
Chair, just on a couple of things in connection with that in terms of the various options. I think it's clear that there needs to be grouping because, while perhaps it's most acutely seen at the level of an independent or a smaller party, it can actually also, as indicated earlier in the committee, can actually have unforeseen circumstances actually in terms of even larger parties at times that either some are disproportionately higher or lower than they should be across the board because of the way the remainder falls. I would have thought from the point of view of ensuring, and from the point of view of ensuring that effectively there was, want a better word, a cap on that. That could be relatively easily drafted from a legislative point of view on the basis that simply if you have a line in that representation, once the formula is applied, the representation in any committee for any party will be no greater than one more than the number that they're allowed of full numbers under quotas greatest remainder. There's probably drafting ways around that. It strikes me that I wouldn't be overly comfortable purely with direction, and although I appreciate given timescale whether or not a direct reference to regulations being drafted and how it's being done might be the best way. I think that regulations, to be honest, will provide all parties a wee bit more comfort than, with the best will in the world, direction. The one complication with direction is that it can create an impression that depending upon who is the minister and what attitude they take, it seems to be somewhat handing power into Caesar's hands rather than, if you have it by way of regulations, and I would have thought with a relatively short space of time something could be drafted in terms of regulations, or alternatively, if it could be done in terms of time. And there are precedents in terms of, John's mentioned about the second stage, but there's fairly detailed wording within standing orders of the Northern Ireland Assembly, for instance, that could at least be borrowed from and built on as a possibility. So, I have to say I wouldn't say that it's impossible in terms of timescale to have something in by way of amendment. The one thing I think wouldn't be acceptable is, and I'm not keen on direction, I'd be even less keen on a guidance, because actually my interpretation of what's there in Schedule 4 is it's not just that it's silent on groupings, it specifically refers to when a committee is being set up. I would have thought any legal interpretation of that, if really push comes up, it's a fair chance the legal interpretation would be that this process needs rerun every time that it's done. And I think there is a strong legal argument that on the wording that is there at present, that a group system, grouping of committees would actually be precluded under 4. At best there is a chance it could be allowed, but I think sort of a issuing of guidance is not sufficient. I would be wary of direction. I appreciate what you've said in terms of, and it might be that the detail bit, if there isn't time to do it, that a specific amendment which then highlights that the grouping will be done, or the regulations as regards grouping of committees will be done by subordinate legislation, might be the way around it.
I wonder, this is something we'll have to take to the Minister, in terms of whether you could actually do it through sort of an amendment within the sort of Schedule 4, but also then through as a mandatory element of standing orders, which will be sort of specified in regulations that are a draft affirmative process, rather than a separate.
It could be. I mean, I think one way or the other you will need some level of amendment in the face of Schedule 4, because I think, as I said, I think at present it doesn't really make the opportunity. But you know, the exact place which then says here is where the regulations will kick in. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's largely speaking going to be a drafting issue. But so long as the detail of that, whether it's directly on the face of it, or the detail is then developed in the regulations, I think that one of those two routes has got to be the route which is gone down.
Schedule 4 also says that it will be done at the beginning of the 4-year term.
Yes.
But that's not as grouped committees. Is that right? Or is that individual committees?
At the minute, as Mr. Weir says, it could be interpreted. You know, the strict legal interpretation is that it's a single committee, but it is done at the start of the council term of the 4 years. So you determine that Party A would have 6 members of the committee, and that's then their sort of membership right throughout.
I think, Chair, the fact that it's the start of the term only really is relevant really to the positions of responsibility. It actually isn't really overly relevant, particularly to the issue of the committee places, but that's the grouping bit's a separate issue to the timing of things.
Okay. So, are you going away and going to think about amendments?
We will go away and put a submission to the Minister. We'll think about it and put a submission then to the Minister on this.
Okay. Thank you very much.
To the committee.
Yep. Any other questions for them?
You take some Paddy's Day off.
Are you okay there?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any indications of when consideration stage will be coming?
Don't mention the 18th.
I'm afraid that it is provisionally the 18th.
Okay.
And possibly into the 19th, I think.
Okay, fingers crossed. How many amendments have you got now altogether?
We haven't actually counted them, but there's a sizable number.
I have been told about 54 or 55. Yes. Is it roughly that?
I presume Chair isn't including because I know
a couple of issues. It's just departmental.
I know, so I mean, we've got, I think, what, half a dozen maybe, is it? Or,
do you have half a dozen?
No, not as I'm saying.
We have about 7.
Judging from the report, we had about 7.
We have 7.
Is that including the 2 from this morning, or maybe more? So.
No, so that's 60 something. No.
And there might be a few from
and then
parties.
From parties.
We're not worried about the amendments, the other ones.
Yeah. And I intend now, members, to put in a field on community planning. I talked to you, Carol, yesterday, so I've spoken to community places there. They are very, very keen to make it slightly stronger on the face of the bill in terms of community planning.
Chair, just to inform the committee, I would intend, if spoken to the Bill's office, to put down the issue that was raised with us by Nilga about the partnership panel representation. I'm going to put down the amendment on that issue.
I'll be very happy to go along with you on that. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So, okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The Bill office will be very busy. Okay, members, thank you very much for all your input. I think we clarified quite a bit, and thank you. Yeah. We clarified quite a bit of issues. Just such a bill, such a big bill to really look at. So, members, last item now, more or less, correspondence. Just looked actions at page 76, members, and then correspondence regarding consultation on a Daradian gold mine. I don't know whether members this morning heard the news that apparently the company sent Christmas cards and even a condolence card to the local residents there and created a bit of bad feelings. Difficult to judge really how it should be done and can be done. So members, are you content to forward to the department for comments on this?
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah. Sounds odd to think Northern Ireland have gold. Sounds a bit like, like yes, might have. I mean, may have
I wouldn't
gold.
be buying shares or a pan or something just yet.
Okay.
Gold in their hills.
Yes.
But I may not.
Yes, members then, okay, content for the correspondence to be forwarded to the Department for comment and for them to come back to us. Then the second one to bring to your attention is at page 82. It's an open letter to all MRAs regarding DVA retention of services at Coleraine. So the consultation ended September last year, and 5 months on, we still haven't heard the decision about it. So, members, are you content to forward the letter then to the department for their comment?
Sure, I think that makes sense. And if we maybe ask, and appreciate to some extent the department's probably waiting on decisions getting taken across the water, but if there was anything the department could give us any additional information about the current state of play is in terms of any discussions would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then page 83 is a copy of the letter from the Northern Ireland retailer. What's that? Sorry, retailer traders association, something like that. Yes, and Neutra. Okay, yeah. Copy of their manifesto for the new local councils in Northern Ireland. They asked again, I think they've asked us before, they asked us again if they could come and brief us on this issue. I think last time we have said, we don't really maybe want to create a precedent of looking at people's manifesto, organisations' festo. So, members, should you content?
It's really an issue for individual parties, I would have thought, because it's manifestos for the election. So I suggest that they speak to individual parties. That would be better.
Yeah, I think so. I think we said that before. So if we write back and said, really, it is not the committee's remit to look at manifestos of individual organisations, but they are obviously at liberty if they want to approach individual political parties.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, members. Then forward work programme is at page 142. AOBs. Any AOBs? Yes, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask the committee, or bring it to the chairs or the committee's attention. I sit on the DARD committee, and people are aware of the CAP reform. Well, I believe there that because of the position that it takes, what I'm asking for, there's implications there, proposed in the CAP reform that would stop or hinder farmers building on their own property. The point is that in the existing planning, as I understand it, it says there, that a farmer wishing to build a single build on his property has to work on the farm, or the land has been or agricultural use and looked after environmentally. Well, the new CAP proposals brings forward saying that the responsibility for agricultural and environmental care of the land is the responsibility of the person that works the farm, the active farmer, in other words. So I think there, there's an implication here, for farmers that own land now that can apply or dwelling on their farm, that in the future, after the 1st of May, that may not be the case.
No, Chair, I mean,
and the reason why I'm saying it is because it's a planning issue, but because of the consequences of the change possibly in CAP reform that will bring that about.
That's the greening element of the.
No.
Go ahead. No, Chair. At the minute, as the policy sits in terms of plan, it's land use, but because something in CAP reform is going to interfere with that, given permission within the land use. So we need to check out, one, we need to write, and I agree with my colleague, we need to write to the department to see the new reform and how it's going to impact on planning in terms of farm activity. And then we need to write to DARD to confirm exactly what it is that's coming forward that will impact. because there seems to be some confusion here. Because in one situation, you're getting a payment through DARD and everything else through the capital forum, and then DOE's issue is actually land use. So there seems to be something coming there that may impact on it. We need to find out exactly what that is.
Okay.
How it will
Perhaps
impact.
we can ask for a bit of research on this as well.
Well, Chair, I think we need to write to both departments.
Sure.
One, the DOE, and see how it impacts
Yeah.
the DARD as well, to see what they
Chair, I've talked to architects and to people within planning, and they see it that way also, you know, and I know it, when it was asked to the committee on...
Okay, how did they impact on planning commission? Okay, yeah, we can write then to the two departments. Members content with that? Okay. Then date, time and place of next meeting. The Cow Committee has requested the use of the Senate chamber on the 13th of March. Why?
Next Thursday. They're having the minister up and other people, and they want to use the
They want a bigger room? Okay, fair enough. So
they're not televised currently either, and they thought they would like to be televised for that meeting.
Okay, so we are moving to room 21 to accommodate that. Okay, members, you content with that? So our next meeting is next Thursday, the 13th, 10 o'clock in room 21, and I'm sending my apologies
for next week, Chair.
Yes, Kathy and Cahill and I are going to be in Washington. Okay, lovely, thank you. So I'll see you the following week. Sorry?